For 4 agonizing months, my son-in-law spun a web of perfect polished excuses. She is in a meeting. She is on a flight. She is just too swamped to talk right now. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But then a crumpled piece of paper shoved under my front door shattered that illusion completely. The messy, frantic handwriting read, "Your daughter is in danger. He will not let her call." My blood ran colder than a bitter Chicago winter. What was really happening behind the closed doors of their multi-million-dollar mansion? I was about to find out, and I was bringing hell with me. My name is Gregory. I am 69 years old, a retired military combat engineer, and a man who does not play games when it comes to his flesh and blood. Before I tell you the rest of this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe a father's instinct is never wrong. Sitting at my small kitchen table, the smell of dark roast coffee filling the quiet morning air, I was methodically cleaning my old hunting rifle. It is a habit from my service days, keeping my hands busy to keep my mind sharp and focused. I stood up to grab a clean cloth from the hallway closet. That is when my heavy leather boot crunched against something unusual. A small folded piece of lined paper was wedged just under the front door gap. I picked it up, my calloused fingers smoothing out the deep wrinkles. The words were written in a frantic, hurried scrawl. "Your daughter is in danger. He will not let her call." The words stared back at me heavy and suffocating. My daughter Camille is a brilliant, unstoppable force of nature. At 34 years old, she had built a groundbreaking health technology startup from the ground up, turning it into an empire worth tens of millions of dollars. She was driven, she was resilient, and she was my absolute pride and joy, especially after my beautiful wife Patricia passed away 5 years ago. Camille was the kind of woman who commanded a room, the kind who never backed down from a challenge. But for the last 4 months, my vibrant, talkative girl had become a complete ghost. Every single time I dialed her personal number, the call would ring twice and go straight to a generic automated voicemail. When I called the main house line, Logan, her slick, fast-talking husband, would always be the one to answer the phone. He is a 36-year-old chief financial officer, a white man with a $1 million smile and a massive closet full of incredibly expensive tailored suits. I never fully trusted that perfect smile of his. It never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. "Hey, Gregory," he would say, his tone dripping with that fake corporate warmth that immediately made my skin crawl. "Camille is tied up in a massive board meeting right now and cannot be disturbed." Or he would casually say, "Oh, she just stepped out to meet with some crucial new investors for the next funding round." Or my personal favorite, "She is completely exhausted from the third quarter financial reviews and is sleeping it off, so I do not want to wake her up. I will definitely tell her you called." But she never called back, not a single time. I had tried to rationalize it in my head. Running a massive technology company is not a regular 9-to-5 job. I told myself I was just being a paranoid old man who needed to give the newlyweds their necessary space to build their life together. But a father knows his child. You know the natural rhythm of your child's life. Camille and I used to talk every Sunday evening without fail, a tradition we kept alive since her early college days. She would never just drop off the face of the earth like this. Looking at this terrifying note, my stomach tied into a tight, agonizing knot. The horrifying coincidence hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The prolonged silence was not because she was busy with her career. The silence was enforced. Someone had intentionally slipped this warning note under my door in the dead of night, risking their own personal safety to warn me. My little girl was trapped and isolated. I did not waste another second trying to convince myself otherwise. I grabbed my truck keys, threw on my heavy jacket, and headed straight out the door. I drove my heavy truck through the sprawling, wealthy suburban streets, watching the perfectly manicured lawns and towering ancient oak trees blur past my windows. My knuckles were bone white against the steering wheel, holding onto it like a lifeline. I was a combat engineer in the military for 20 years. I spent decades building solid bridges and dismantling complex explosive threats in highly dangerous war zones across the globe. I knew exactly how to stay calm under intense pressure, and how to assess a hostile situation without letting blind emotion cloud my tactical judgment. I had faced enemies armed with rifles and improvised explosives. But right now, the only thing keeping me from driving my 3-ton truck straight through their massive iron front gates was the absolute need to be strategic and smart. I could not save my daughter if I was sitting in the back of a police cruiser. I pulled up to their massive gated property, a modern glass and stone mansion nestled quietly in a highly exclusive neighborhood. I walked up the long stone driveway, my heavy boots echoing loudly in the quiet morning air. I did not bother ringing the polite little doorbell. I pounded my fist against the heavy mahogany front door, the sound booming like a warning drum. A minute later, the heavy door swung open. Logan stood there looking entirely unbothered. He was wearing a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up perfectly to his elbows, holding a ceramic coffee mug in one hand. He looked entirely too relaxed and too put together for an early Tuesday morning. "Gregory," he said, his perfectly straight teeth flashing in a practiced, condescending smirk. "What a surprise. We were not expecting you today." "Where is Camille?" I demanded. I did not raise my voice, but the cold, hard steel in my tone was unmistakable. "I want to see my daughter right now." Logan did not even blink. He leaned comfortably against the doorframe, physically blocking the entrance with his body, sipping his expensive coffee casually. "Dad, you really should have called first," he sighed, putting on a highly convincing mask of mild exhaustion. "Camille flew out to Seattle early this morning. There is a massive crisis with the West Coast distribution team that she has to handle personally. She was in such a rush, she barely had time to pack a bag. I will be sure to shoot her a quick text and tell her you stopped by to check on her. I am absolutely sure she will call you as soon as she lands and gets settled in her hotel room." I stood there on the wide porch, staring directly into his pale blue eyes. He was incredibly smooth. Too smooth. He was a practiced liar who had rehearsed his defensive lines until they sounded like the absolute undeniable truth. The primal instinct to grab him by the collar, shove him aside, and tear the large house apart piece by piece flared up inside me, burning hot and violently. I wanted to break down every door until I found her, but my military training kicked in immediately, suppressing the blinding rage. A frontal assault without full intelligence and backup is a fool's game that always ends in disaster. If I caused a major physical scene right now, he would just call the police and claim the crazy, aggressive father-in-law was trespassing and acting violently. He would use the law as a shield to lock me out permanently. I needed solid, undeniable proof before I made my next calculated move. "I understand," I said, forcing my voice to remain perfectly even and calm. "Tell her I love her when you speak to her. Always do." "Gregory," Logan smiled, pulling the heavy door shut in my face. I turned around and started walking slowly down the long driveway. I kept my head down, acting like a defeated, tired old man who believed the lie. But as I reached the end of the property, I paused to tie my boot. I glanced up at the large decorative mirror window of the neighbor's house directly across the quiet street. The angle gave me a perfect, unobstructed view straight into the side windows of Logan's closed garage. My breath caught sharply in my throat. Resting quietly inside the dimly lit garage, unmistakable with its custom chrome rims, was Camille's black luxury SUV. Logan was lying straight to my face. My daughter had not flown to Seattle this morning. She was still locked inside that house. I did not get into my truck and drive away like a defeated old man. I drove 2 blocks down, parked behind a thick row of hedges, and walked back through the wooded trail behind their property. My military training had not left me even at 69 years old. Decades of moving silently through hostile territories overseas made sneaking through a manicured suburban backyard feel like a simple walk in the park. I kept low, using the shadows of the large decorative oak trees and the expansive guest house to mask my approach. I reached the back patio completely undetected. The rear entrance to their home was secured by an electronic keypad. For the past 4 years, the code had always been Patricia's birthday. It was a sweet tribute Camille had insisted on when they first bought the massive house to keep her mother's memory alive. I pressed the familiar numbers. A harsh red light flashed, indicating an error. I tried again, pressing the digits carefully. Denied. Logan had erased my late wife from their security system. He had isolated my daughter, completely cutting off every possible point of access I had to her. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. He was actively locking down the fortress. I pressed my back against the cool stone wall of the house, analyzing my options. If the code was changed and the front was guarded, I needed visual confirmation before I made my next move. I crept along the side of the house toward the large floor-to-ceiling windows of the formal dining room. I moved with calculated precision, placing every footstep deliberately to avoid the dry autumn leaves scattered across the patio. I pressed my face near the edge of the tinted glass, peering through a small gap in the heavy velvet curtains. The interior of the massive house was eerily quiet. It did not look like a home where a young, vibrant executive lived. It looked like a sterile medical facility. My eyes scanned the grand foyer and the sweeping staircase. Suddenly, a door opened down the hall. A woman stepped out into the corridor. She was not Camille. She was a tall, stern-looking woman wearing crisp white medical scrubs. My heart hammered aggressively against my ribs. Camille was perfectly healthy. She ran half marathons and worked out every single morning. She had absolutely no need for a private in-house nurse. The woman was carrying a shiny silver medical tray. As she walked past the large crystal chandelier, I could see exactly what was on that tray. 2 large syringes and several small glass vials with bright orange warning labels. I had spent enough time in military medical tents to recognize heavy liquid sedatives when I saw them. The nurse turned and began walking up the grand staircase, heading directly toward the master bedroom suite. The reality of the situation hit me with the force of a runaway freight train. Camille was not on a business trip to Seattle. She was not closing deals or managing a corporate crisis. My brilliant, strong daughter was being kept upstairs, completely incapacitated and heavily drugged in her own home. Logan had turned their multi-million-dollar mansion into a private chemical prison. He was pumping her full of narcotics to keep her compliant and silent. The protective father inside me wanted to smash through the heavy glass window, grab that tray, and break Logan in half. But bursting in right now would give him the perfect excuse to call the police and claim I was a violent intruder attacking his hired medical staff. I needed to hear his plan. I needed to know exactly why he was doing this to my flesh and blood. I held my ground, breathing slowly through my nose, waiting for my target to reveal his hand. The heavy glass door to the second-floor balcony slid open with a soft metallic click. I pressed my body flat against the stone wall directly beneath the overhang, holding my breath. Logan stepped out into the crisp morning air. He was holding his cell phone to his ear, his posture completely relaxed. The fake corporate smile he had worn at the front door was gone. His face was twisted into a cold, calculating sneer. I could hear his voice perfectly clear, cutting through the silence of the backyard. "Yes, I just got rid of him," Logan said, his tone dripping with absolute contempt. That old black guy just showed up at the front door asking questions. He bought the Seattle excuse for now, but he is getting suspicious. I do not have time to play games with a paranoid veteran anymore. We need to accelerate the timeline immediately. There was a brief pause as he listened to the person on the other end. I gripped the rough stone of the wall until my fingers ached. Then Logan spoke again, delivering words that made my blood boil with a lethal intensity. "Tell the nurse to up the dosage today," Logan commanded coldly. "I do not care if it makes her sick or completely incoherent. Just keep her heavily sedated and compliant. I need that bitch to sign the full power of attorney documents by tomorrow morning. If she is conscious enough to fight back, we lose the entire company and the payout. Do whatever it takes to get her signature on that paper." My vision literally blurred with pure, unfiltered rage. He was not just isolating her. He was staging a violent corporate coup against his own wife. He was poisoning my daughter to steal her life's work. The company she built, the technology she designed, he was going to take it all and leave her a heavily medicated shell of a human being. The sheer cruelty of his plan was staggering. I reached into my jacket pocket to grab my phone. I needed to record this conversation. I needed undeniable audio proof to take to the authorities to show them exactly what kind of monster was living in this house. My fingers fumbled with the screen of my phone as I pulled it from my heavy jacket. I was rushing, trying to open the voice memo application before Logan finished his call. But in my haste, my thick thumb brushed the wrong button. The screen lit up brightly, and a loud, sharp notification chime echoed through the silent patio. The sound was deafening in the quiet morning air. Logan stopped speaking immediately. He leaned over the balcony railing, looking straight down at the bushes where I was hiding. "Hey," he shouted, his voice echoing with sudden panic and aggressive authority. "Who the hell is down there?" I did not wait for him to spot me clearly. I shoved the phone back into my pocket and bolted. I sprinted across the perfectly manicured lawn, moving faster than I had in 20 years. Behind me, I heard Logan shouting orders. Then I heard the terrifying sound of heavy paws hitting the grass. Logan had released his 2 massive guard dogs. The animals barked viciously, closing the distance with terrifying speed. I vaulted over the tall wooden privacy fence, feeling the sharp teeth of the lead dog snap the air just inches from my boot. I hit the ground hard on the other side, rolling into the dirt trail. I scrambled to my feet and ran toward my hidden truck, my heart pounding relentlessly. I was out, but the war had officially begun. I slammed the heavy door of my truck shut and jammed the keys into the ignition with brutal force. The engine roared to life just as the massive iron gates of Logan's property began to buzz open in the distance. I threw the gear into drive and sped down the pristine suburban street, leaving the terrifying echoes of his aggressive guard dogs far behind me. My chest heaved with the heavy physical exertion of the escape, but my mind was already racing a million miles ahead, analyzing the battlefield. Logan was not simply planning a standard corporate takeover. He was systematically dismantling every single aspect of my daughter's life from the inside out. If he was aggressively pressing her for a full power of attorney signature by tomorrow morning, he absolutely had to be moving large liquid assets already. Logan was a greedy, calculated chief financial officer. He would never leave millions of dollars sitting idle while he orchestrated a violent coup against his own wife. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned bone white, making a sharp and highly illegal turn at the next major intersection. I did not head back to my empty house. I drove straight toward the towering glass buildings of the downtown financial district. When Camille first launched her incredible health technology startup and secured her massive initial round of funding, she did something that moved me to tears. She set up an ironclad joint trust fund at a premier private wealth bank. It was a financial safety net specifically designed to ensure I would never have to worry about my retirement expenses. We were both registered as equal signatories with full access. If Logan was aggressively tightening the noose around her neck, he would absolutely target her personal liquid reserves first. I needed to see exactly how deep his filthy, manicured hands were buried in her accounts. I pulled up to the imposing marble columns of the bank, ignoring the protesting valet and parking my heavy truck aggressively in the loading zone. I stormed through the heavy glass revolving doors, my combat boots echoing loudly across the polished marble floor. I did not bother waiting patiently in the plush reception area like a normal client. I bypassed the startled front desk attendants completely and pushed open the heavy, frosted glass door of Richard Vance. He was the senior account manager who had personally handled Camille's trust fund for the last 7 highly profitable years. Richard looked up from his dual monitors, his eyes widening in absolute shock at my sudden, unannounced entrance. My heavy canvas jacket was covered in dirt and dry leaves from rolling under Logan's privacy fence, and I was breathing heavily like a man preparing for open warfare. "Gregory," he stammered quickly, standing up and nervously adjusting his expensive silk tie. "What an unexpected visit today. Is everything all right with Camille?" I walked directly to his desk and sat down heavily in the leather guest chair, leaning forward with an intense predatory focus that made Richard visibly flinch backward. "I need to see the complete transaction history for the joint trust fund immediately," I commanded, my voice dropping into a cold, authoritative register. "Pull up the ledger right now, Richard." "Do not make me ask twice." Richard swallowed hard, his professional customer service smile completely faltering under my intense stare. He nervously clicked his wireless mouse, his eyes quickly scanning the private banking screen. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking sick and terrified. "Gregory, I assumed you already knew about this." He started, his voice trembling slightly as he looked from the screen back to my face. "Knew what exactly?" I demanded, leaning even closer across the polished wood. Richard turned his large monitor toward me, his hands shaking. The bold red numbers on the banking screen hit me with the devastating force of a physical blow to the gut. The account balance, which usually sat comfortably at $500,000, was practically empty. Exactly $400,000 had been wired out of the secure trust fund less than 48 hours ago. I stared at the glaring screen, my blood turning to pure ice in my veins. "Where did that money go, Richard?" I asked with a dangerous calm. "Who authorized a transfer of that massive magnitude without my direct verbal consent?" Richard pulled up the specific transfer details, wiping sweat from his brow. The funds were wired in 4 separate rapid installments to offshore holding accounts based in the Cayman Islands. The receiving accounts are registered under a corporate entity fully managed by your son-in-law, Logan. The official reason listed on the international wire transfer form is special overseas medical expenses. Medical expenses. I repeated the words, tasting like vile poison in my mouth. Logan was not just isolating her. He was using her forced medical captivity to legally siphon her hard-earned wealth into untraceable offshore accounts. I stood up and slammed my heavy fist down on the solid mahogany desk. The impact was so sudden and violent that Richard's ceramic coffee mug jumped, spilling dark liquid across his neat stacks of financial paperwork. "Freeze the account right now," I roared, the suppressed military commander inside me finally breaking out and taking total control. "Put a hard permanent block on every single cent left in that trust. Flag those offshore transfers as completely fraudulent and initiate an immediate federal recall of the funds. Logan is actively stealing my daughter's money. He is committing massive financial fraud right under your nose." Richard scrambled backward in his expensive leather chair, looking absolutely terrified that I might reach across the desk and grab him. "Gregory, please calm down," he pleaded, raising both hands in a frantic defensive gesture. "I cannot do that. I cannot freeze the account or reverse the international wires." My jaw clenched so hard I felt my teeth grinding together. "What do you mean you cannot do it?" I asked, stepping around the side of the desk. "I am an equal signatory on that joint trust. I am legally ordering you to stop the hemorrhaging of our family funds." Richard shook his head wildly, wiping another bead of sweat from his pale forehead. He reached a trembling hand into a locked desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder. He slid it cautiously across the desk toward me like it was an active explosive device. "You do not understand the situation, Gregory. My hands are completely tied by our corporate legal department. Logan came in personally 3 days ago to initiate these massive wire transfers. When I strongly questioned the withdrawal amount and the overseas destination, he provided us with official notarized documentation." I stared at the closed folder, my stomach dropping into a dark, bottomless pit of realization. I knew exactly what kind of sick game Logan was playing. He was a ruthless corporate shark who never left a paper trail exposed. "Open it," Richard instructed softly, his voice filled with genuine pity and helpless regret. I slowly opened the heavy manila folder. Resting on top was a certified medical evaluation printed on the official high-grade letterhead of a highly prestigious private psychiatric facility. It was signed with a bold black pen by a licensed medical doctor. The very same stern-looking doctor I had just seen walking up the sweeping staircase of their mansion with a silver tray full of heavy liquid sedatives. Logan had not just outsmarted me financially today. He had built an impenetrable legal fortress around his massive theft. I picked up the crisp white paper, my eyes scanning the dense professional medical jargon. The printed words burned into my brain like acid eating away at my last shred of hope. The document officially diagnosed Camille with a severe acute nervous breakdown accompanied by extreme violent paranoia and dangerous early-onset dementia symptoms. The corrupt doctor explicitly stated that my brilliant, strong daughter was completely unfit to make rational, personal, or financial decisions of any kind. She was legally and medically classified as a direct danger to herself and her massive corporate assets. But the final paragraph on the second page was the absolute death blow to my fight. Attached securely to the fake medical evaluation was an emergency court order granted by a sympathetic local judge. The official stamp of the court glared back at me. It officially stripped Camille of all her financial autonomy and immediately appointed Logan as her exclusive legal and medical guardian. He had absolute total control over every single penny she owned, every property she possessed, and every medical decision regarding her body. I dropped the paper back onto the desk, the chilling reality of Logan's master plan finally coming into crystal clear focus. He did not just want to sell her company tomorrow and take the cash. He had successfully rendered her legally incompetent in the eyes of the state. He was holding all the winning cards, and now the strict laws of the system were officially protecting the monster holding my daughter hostage. I walked out of the towering bank feeling the heavy weight of the corrupt legal system pressing down on my shoulders. Logan had built an impenetrable fortress of fraudulent paperwork and dirty medical professionals that I could not simply smash through with brute force. He had the courts completely on his side. But every fortress has a weak point. Every tactical operation leaves a trail of breadcrumbs. I needed raw, actionable intelligence. I needed to know exactly who had risked their life to slide that warning note under my front door in the dead of night. I climbed back into my heavy truck and slammed the door shut. I stared at the dashboard and a sudden realization hit me. My truck was equipped with a military-grade continuous recording dash cam. It captured a wide-angle, high-definition view of my entire front yard and porch 24 hours a day. I reached up, pulled the small memory card from the camera, and shoved it into the rugged laptop I kept hidden under the passenger seat. I booted up the system right there in the bank parking lot and scrolled through the time-stamped video files, winding back to the early hours of the morning. At exactly 3:14 in the morning, a shadowy figure darted across my lawn. I paused the video and enhanced the grainy night vision footage. The figure was wearing a thick, oversized winter coat and moving with a distinct, slight limp. She pulled the hood back for just a fraction of a second to frantically check her surroundings. My breath hitched in my throat. It was Maria. Maria was a warm, hard-working Hispanic woman who had been Camille's loyal head housekeeper for 6 entire years. She was practically family. She loved my daughter like her own. Why was she sneaking around like a fugitive in the middle of the night? Logan must have purged the staff to eliminate any loyal witnesses. I pulled out my phone and dialed a personal contact number I had saved years ago. I needed to find her immediately. Tracking Maria down took less than an hour. We agreed to meet at a rundown, greasy spoon diner on the industrial outskirts of the city, miles away from Logan's wealthy, manicured neighborhood. When I walked through the dingy glass doors, I spotted her immediately. She was huddled in the darkest corner booth, gripping a chipped ceramic coffee mug with both trembling hands. She looked absolutely terrified. Her eyes darted nervously toward the entrance every time a car drove past the dirty front windows. I slid into the cracked vinyl booth opposite her, keeping my posture calm and non-threatening. The moment she saw my face, the dam broke. Heavy tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks and her shoulders shook violently. She leaned across the sticky table, her voice dropping to a frantic, terrified whisper. "Gregory, you have to save her," she sobbed, gripping my forearm with surprising strength. "Logan is a monster. He fired the entire original household staff 2 weeks ago without any warning or severance pay. He replaced us all with cold, silent private security people who answer only to him." Maria explained that she suspected something sinister was happening, so she had secretly returned to the property using an old spare key Logan did not know about. What she witnessed made my blood run freezing cold. Logan was not just administering standard prescribed medication. He was aggressively crushing heavy, dangerous sedatives into a fine powder and mixing them directly into Camille's morning smoothies and evening soups. He was deliberately keeping her in a constant heavy chemical stupor. Maria described the sickening scene she watched through a cracked door. Logan would prop my brilliant, strong daughter up against the heavy headboard like a lifeless rag doll. He would place a pen in her limp hand, physically guide her fingers, and force her to sign towering stacks of complex legal documents. Camille could not even keep her eyes open, let alone comprehend the massive corporate theft she was authorizing. When Maria tried to intervene and stop him, Logan aggressively shoved her against the hallway wall. He threatened to have her deported and ruin her entire family if she ever breathed a word to anyone. I sat there in the dim diner, absorbing the sheer horror of her words. The physical and psychological abuse Logan was inflicting on my flesh and blood was sickening beyond measure. My military instincts screamed at me to drive back to that mansion, kick down the front door, and physically break him apart with my bare hands. But anger without evidence is a losing strategy that would only end with me in a jail cell and Camille left entirely at his mercy. I looked Maria directly in the eyes. "I need proof." "Maria," I stated firmly, keeping my voice perfectly level, "I cannot bypass a corrupt judge and a fake medical guardianship without hard, undeniable evidence of his crimes. Did you manage to take anything from that house?" Maria wiped her tear-stained face, looking around the diner once more to ensure nobody was listening to our conversation. She reached deep into her battered canvas tote bag and pulled out a crinkled plastic Ziploc bag. She handled it as if it were a highly volatile explosive device. Inside the clear plastic was a crumpled, partially charred piece of thick legal paper. On her final day before Logan's private security team physically threw her off the estate, Maria saw him burning a massive pile of documents in the master study fireplace. Logan was arrogant and reckless, assuming the roaring fire would instantly turn his treacherous paper trail to pure ash. After he hastily left the room to deal with a delivery at the front gate, Maria rushed to the blazing hearth. She reached her bare hands directly into the scorching hot ashes, burning her fingertips to pull out the only piece of paper that had not been completely consumed by the flames. She slid the plastic bag across the sticky table toward me. I picked it up with extreme care. The edges of the thick paper were scorched pitch black, crumbling slightly under the pressure of my thick fingers. But the center text, the most crucial part of the document, remained perfectly legible. It was a highly detailed draft of a massive corporate acquisition agreement. I pulled my reading glasses from my jacket pocket and scrutinized the dense legal text. My heart pounded against my ribs like a jackhammer. This was not a simple transfer of minor assets or a standard business deal. It was a complete hostile corporate liquidation. The burned document outlined the absolute immediate sale of Camille's entire health technology empire to a massive, ruthless rival conglomerate. The total purchase price was boldly printed in the center of the scorched page, $50 million. But the most sickening part was the intricate payout structure Logan had designed. Because Camille was now legally classified as mentally incapacitated under Logan's full medical guardianship, the massive $50 million buyout would bypass her personal corporate accounts completely. The document clearly stated that the funds were slated to be deposited directly into a newly formed offshore holding company. It was the exact same holding company Richard, the bank manager, had just told me about. A shell corporation where Logan was officially listed as the sole executive director. He was selling my daughter's entire life work, her brilliant algorithms, and her thriving business to her biggest competitor. He was planning to pocket every single cent of the $50 million and walk away a wealthy man, leaving Camille an empty, heavily medicated shell trapped in her own home. Logan was not just a greedy husband. He was a highly organized corporate predator executing the perfect $50 million heist, and he was using my daughter's life as collateral. I folded the plastic bag and placed it securely inside my inner jacket pocket. The game had completely changed. I was no longer just dealing with a manipulative son-in-law. I was dealing with a criminal mastermind who had successfully weaponized the medical and legal systems to commit a massive atrocity. But Logan had made one fatal miscalculation. He had left me alive and free to operate on the outside. I left the dingy diner with Maria's written statement secured in my inner pocket right next to the scorched corporate contract. My heavy combat boots hit the pavement with renewed purpose and absolute determination. I had hard physical evidence of a massive $50 million fraud and a credible witness willing to testify about the forced drugging of my daughter. The legal system was notoriously corrupt and slow, but I knew Chief Harris personally. We had served on the same local veteran council for over 5 years. He was a straight shooter, a man who respected the chain of command and valued hard, undeniable facts over slick corporate smiles. I drove my heavy truck directly to the main precinct downtown. The station was bustling with the usual mid-morning chaos of ringing phones, shouting suspects, and shuffling officers, but I walked straight past the busy front desk. I did not stop to ask for permission or wait for an escort. I pushed open the heavy wooden door to the chief's private office. Harris looked up from his messy desk, his gray mustache twitching in genuine surprise. I did not give him a chance to offer a polite greeting or a friendly handshake. I slammed the heavy manila folder down onto his cluttered desk. The loud smack echoed sharply in the small room. Inside that folder is undeniable proof that my son-in-law Logan is holding my daughter hostage against her will. I stated, my voice ringing with absolute military authority. He is heavily drugging her with unauthorized sedatives and violently forcing her to sign away her $50 million company. I have a sworn signed statement from her former head housekeeper and a partially burned contract proving his clear intent to commit massive corporate fraud. I need you to dispatch a tactical unit to that house and arrest him right now. Chief Harris did not reach for the folder. He did not even look down at the scorched contract or the meticulously typed witness statement I had just risked everything to secure. Instead, he let out a long, heavy sigh and leaned back in his worn leather chair. He removed his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, looking at me with an expression that made the blood in my veins run completely cold. It was not the look of a fierce ally preparing for a major raid. It was a look of deep, uncomfortable pity and bureaucratic hesitation. "Gregory, I cannot look at those papers," Harris said, his voice low and strained. He slowly opened his top desk drawer and pulled out a thick blue legal folder. He placed it squarely on top of my evidence, completely covering the proof of Logan's horrendous crimes. I stared at the blue folder, my mind quickly calculating the sudden tactical shift in the room. "What is that, Harris?" I demanded, feeling my jaw clench tightly. "Why are you completely ignoring a documented $50 million felony happening right in your own jurisdiction?" Harris slid the blue folder across the smooth desk toward me. It was stamped heavily with the official red seal of the County Supreme Court. The date printed clearly at the top was from this exact morning, just hours after my tense confrontation with Logan at the front door. "I am sorry," Gregory Harris said softly. "But as of 8 o'clock this morning, I am legally obligated to serve you with this official document." I opened the heavy blue cover and my eyes scanned the bold black text. It was an emergency temporary restraining order. The plaintiff listed proudly at the top was Logan. The protected parties included him, his private property, and my own vulnerable daughter, Camille. The legal parameters were absolute and uncompromising. The court had granted a full protective injunction against me. I felt the air leave my lungs as I read the strict, unyielding stipulations. I was legally barred from making any physical, visual, or electronic contact with my daughter. The system had not just ignored my desperate plea for help, it had actively moved to neutralize me entirely. I stared at the official signature of the judge at the bottom of the page. Logan had not just anticipated my next move. He had completely outflanked me using the very legal system I was trying to rely on to save her life. I gripped the edges of the restraining order until the thick paper crinkled under my thumbs. My eyes darted to the sworn affidavit attached to the back of the heavy injunction. It was a multi-page document meticulously crafted by Logan and his ruthless team of highly paid corporate lawyers. The lies printed on those pristine pages were so incredibly vile they literally took my breath away. Logan had painted a terrifying and entirely fabricated picture of my mental health and physical stability. Under penalty of perjury, he claimed that I was suffering from rapid-onset Alzheimer's disease and extreme violent paranoia. The affidavit detailed the incident from this morning, twisting the narrative entirely out of proportion. It stated that a confused and highly aggressive elderly veteran had shown up at his home unprovoked, screaming wild delusions about corporate espionage and physically threatening to break down the heavy front door. He even included a fabricated medical statement from the corrupt private doctor claiming my extensive military background made me a severe physical threat to the peaceful household. He had completely inverted reality. He made himself look like the terrified, protective husband desperately trying to shield his severely ill wife from her dangerous, unhinged father. "Look at this garbage, Harris," I growled, tossing the fraudulent document back onto the desk. "You have known me for a decade. Do I look like a man losing his mind to severe dementia? Do I sound like a paranoid old fool shouting at the clouds?" Harris stood up and walked around the desk, placing a heavy, sympathetic hand on my shoulder. "Gregory, I know you are a good, sane man," he said quietly, "but my hands are completely tied by the Supreme Court." Logan provided them with extensive medical documentation and sworn statements from licensed security professionals claiming you trespassed on his property and directly threatened his life. In the strict eyes of the law right now, you are the dangerous aggressor. He is using this fake paper shield to isolate Camille completely, I argued, pushing his hand away and standing my ground. "If you enforce this ridiculous order, you are handing him the keys to her execution." Harris shook his head, his expression hardening into the stoic face of a law enforcement officer strictly bound by the rules. The judge signed the order. "Gregory, I cannot override a Supreme Court injunction based on a piece of burned paper you brought me. If I send a police unit to that house to investigate your wild claims without a warrant, Logan's lawyers will have my badge by sunset, and you will be thrown in a cell for violating the federal order." Two heavily armed uniformed officers stepped into the office, standing silently by the door with their hands resting near their duty belts. The atmosphere in the small room had shifted drastically from a tense conversation between old friends to a stark official warning. Harris looked me directly in the eyes, his tone losing all its previous warmth and camaraderie. "Read the bottom line of that legal document carefully, Gregory. It mandates a strict 100-meter perimeter. If you step foot anywhere within 100 meters of Logan's property, his vehicles, or your daughter, we will have no choice but to arrest you immediately. The exact moment you cross that invisible line, we will put you in tight handcuffs and lock you in a holding cell without bail." I stood in the center of the police chief's office, holding the scorched evidence of my daughter's destruction in one hand and the legal document protecting her abuser in the other. Logan had successfully weaponized the entire police force against me. He had built a massive, impenetrable wall of legal red tape around his horrific crimes. I was officially stripped of all my legal weapons, unable to rely on the authorities to save my own flesh and blood. I did not argue further. I turned around and walked past the two armed officers stepping out into the cold afternoon air. The law had failed me entirely. It was time to stop playing by their rules. I sat in my truck outside the precinct. No tears, no screaming. Pity and panic were civilian luxuries I could no longer afford. The moment the police chief handed me that restraining order, the rules of engagement shifted entirely. I was no longer a concerned father trying to navigate a corrupt bureaucracy. I was a combat engineer stepping back into the theater of war. I pulled out a prepaid burner phone I always kept hidden in my emergency go bag. I dialed a heavily encrypted number I had not used in 6 years. The line rang exactly twice before a gravelly voice answered. Malcolm was a former military intelligence operative and a ghost in the cybersecurity world. We had served 3 grueling tours together, and he owed me his life after a chaotic extraction mission in Kabul. Gregory Malcolm said, his voice low and instantly alert to the heavy tension in my silence. You do not call on this secure line to catch up on old times. Tell me the target. I need a digital fortress completely dismantled, I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. My son-in-law is holding Camille hostage. He has weaponized the medical and legal systems. I have a Supreme Court restraining order keeping me 100 meters away from her, and he is actively orchestrating a $50 million hostile corporate takeover of her company. I need eyes inside his property right now, and I need absolute discretion. Give me 5 minutes to boot up the heavy servers. Malcolm answered, the sound of rapid typing already echoing in the background. Send me the exact address. We are going completely dark on this one. I drove to a desolate industrial park and parked my truck deep in the shadows of an abandoned warehouse. I opened my rugged laptop and linked it to the secure connection Malcolm had just established. The screen flickered to life, displaying a dozen high-definition video feeds. Malcolm had not just hacked into the public traffic cameras on Logan's wealthy street. He had successfully breached the highly expensive private security network Logan installed around the perimeter of the mansion. We had multiple angles of the towering front gate, the expansive backyard, and the side service entrances. Look at the camera covering the eastern door, Malcolm instructed, his voice feeding directly through my secure earpiece. Logan thinks his digital firewall is impenetrable, but he bought commercial-grade garbage. I watched the live video feed intensely. A sleek silver sports car pulled up to the secluded side door. A woman stepped out. She was wearing a tailored white medical coat, carrying a heavy leather briefcase. It was the exact same stern-looking doctor I had seen earlier, carrying the silver tray of heavy liquid sedatives. Malcolm ran her license plate and facial profile through a series of restricted government databases. Her official name is Dr. Elena Rostova. Malcolm reported, his fingers flying across his mechanical keyboard. She is a licensed private psychiatrist with a history of highly questionable prescription practices. But here is the real payload, Gregory. Look at her financial records and recent travel logs. Malcolm pulled up a split screen showing a series of offshore bank transfers and flight itineraries. Elena Rostova was not just a corrupt doctor on Logan's payroll. She had accompanied him on 5 different luxurious weekend trips to the Bahamas over the past year. They stayed in the same exclusive resort suites and shared a private joint bank account heavily funded by Logan's corporate bonuses. She was his mistress. They were working together as a highly coordinated unit. Logan was using his secret lover to medically incapacitate his own wife, ensuring absolute physical compliance, while they systematically drained her massive empire. The sheer audacity of their sick partnership made my grip tighten around the steering wheel until my joints popped. They felt completely invincible, operating right out in the open. We need audio, Malcolm. I commanded, my eyes tracking Elena as she punched a code into the side door keypad and entered the massive mansion. Can you crack her mobile device? Give me 60 seconds, Malcolm replied. If she connects to the internal wireless network of the house, I can mirror her phone entirely. The tense silence in the truck was deafening as I watched the seconds tick by on my dashboard clock. Suddenly, a sharp burst of static hissed through my earpiece, followed by the crystal-clear sound of a ringing phone. Malcolm had successfully cloned Elena's cellular audio feed. She was making a call from inside the master suite while Logan was busy downstairs. The line connected, and a male voice answered. It was a sketchy underground pharmaceutical supplier. Do you have the final compound? Elena asked, her voice completely devoid of any medical empathy. The supplier confirmed he had secured the untraceable potassium chloride solution. Good, Elena responded coldly. Logan is finalizing the massive corporate transfer documents today. As soon as the final signatures are officially authenticated and the $50 million buyout hits the offshore accounts, we are proceeding with the final phase. My stomach dropped into a bottomless abyss as she continued detailing her monstrous medical strategy. I will administer the potassium injection directly into her intravenous line, Elena explained casually as if she were ordering a cup of coffee. It will cause immediate catastrophic heart failure. Given her documented history of severe nervous breakdown and the heavy sedatives already in her system, the local coroner will rule it a tragic but completely natural cardiac event brought on by extreme stress. There will be absolutely no foul play suspected. Logan will play the devastated, grieving widower, inherit whatever is left, and we will be on a private jet to Zurich by the weekend. I stopped breathing. They were not simply planning to rob Camille and leave her institutionalized in a facility. They were actively plotting a flawless, untraceable execution. Logan and his mistress were going to murder my daughter in cold blood the absolute second she was no longer financially useful to their greedy ambitions. I slammed my fist against the heavy dashboard, the metal denting slightly under the brute force of my profound anger. "When is the exact transfer date?" I demanded, my voice a harsh guttural whisper. Malcolm pulled up the hacked emails from Logan's private encrypted server. "The corporate acquisition meeting is scheduled for this Friday morning at 9 o'clock sharp." Malcolm reported, his tone turning incredibly grim. "Logan is meeting the rival executives at their downtown headquarters to officially finalize the $50 million sale." Today was Tuesday afternoon. I looked at the digital clock glowing brightly on my laptop screen. The timeline was brutally absolute. I had exactly 72 hours. 3 days to dismantle an impenetrable legal fortress, expose a corrupt medical professional, break through a heavily guarded multi-million-dollar estate, and snatch my daughter back from the unforgiving hands of the Grim Reaper. If I missed that severe deadline by a single minute, Camille would be dead, and her murderers would walk away with a massive fortune to start a new life. I closed the laptop and started the heavy engine of my truck. I did not have the law on my side, and I did not have the luxury of time. But I had decades of tactical warfare experience and a father's relentless wrath. The countdown had officially begun. Malcolm did not just find Dr. Elena Rostova's financial records. He tracked the digital footprint of her secret, debilitating addiction. Logan thought he had chosen a brilliant clinical partner for his murderous conspiracy, but he had actually chosen a desperate woman drowning in a dangerous vice. By Tuesday evening, Malcolm's tracking software pinned her cellular device to a desolate industrial sector on the edge of the city. I parked my heavy truck 3 blocks away from an abandoned meatpacking facility. It looked completely derelict from the cold, dark street, but the steady stream of luxury vehicles pulling into the hidden subterranean garage told a very different story. It was an illegal, high-stakes underground casino run by an organized criminal syndicate. Malcolm fed the audio intelligence directly into my earpiece. "Elena is in deep." Gregory Malcolm reported, the sound of his rapid keystrokes echoing in my ear. "She owes a massive fortune to the house. She has been systematically bleeding Logan's offshore allowances dry at the roulette tables. She is currently down another $50,000 tonight alone. That is her fatal flaw. She is not committing this horrific crime out of loyalty or love for your son-in-law. She is doing it because if she does not secure a massive payout by the end of the week, the violent loan sharks running this facility are going to break both of her legs." I sat in the pitch-black cabin of my truck watching the heavily guarded, reinforced steel door of the underground exit. The freezing autumn rain started to fall, but I did not take my eyes off the target for a single second. I did not have to wait long. Desperation makes people incredibly predictable. At exactly 11 o'clock, the heavy metal door swung open. Elena walked out into the freezing night air. Her shoulders were slumped, and her expensive designer coat was pulled tight against the chilling wind. She had the unmistakable defeated posture of a degenerate gambler who had just lost everything she had left. She marched aggressively toward her sleek silver sports car, her high heels clicking sharply against the cracked asphalt. The underground parking structure was dimly lit by a few flickering fluorescent bulbs, casting long, ominous shadows across the concrete pillars. I slipped out of my truck, moving with absolute silence. Decades of tactical military training taught me exactly how to control a physical environment and dictate the terms of an ambush. Before she could even reach the driver's side door, I stepped out from the heavy shadow of a concrete pillar directly into her path. I slammed a thick, heavy manila folder down onto the pristine hood of her expensive car. The sharp, explosive smack echoed like a gunshot in the empty parking lot. Elena gasped violently, taking a terrified step backward. Her designer purse slipped from her shoulder, hitting the wet ground. "Who are you?" she stammered, her voice trembling as she frantically looked around for the armed security guards who were nowhere to be found. "Get away from my vehicle right now, or I am calling the police." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I took one deliberate step forward, invading her personal space and trapping her between my solid physical frame and the cold metal of her car. "Call them," I challenged, my voice a dark, lethal rumble. "Call the police right now, Dr. Rostova. Let us show them the contents of this folder. Let us show the authorities your massive illegal gambling debts, the unrecorded loans from violent criminal syndicates, and the severe medical board reprimands you have been hiding from the federal government." Her hand froze halfway to her coat pocket. The false bravado melted from her face, instantly leaving behind a pale, terrified mask. I tapped my heavy index finger against the thick folder resting on her hood. "I know absolutely everything, Elena," I stated coldly. "I know about the unauthorized liquid sedatives, I know about the fraudulent medical evaluation you signed this morning, and I know all about the lethal dose of potassium chloride you are planning to inject into my daughter's intravenous line the exact second the $50 million corporate buyout clears on Friday morning." The blood completely drained from Elena's face. She looked as though the concrete floor had just opened up beneath her expensive heels. Her chest heaved with rapid, panicked breaths, and her eyes darted frantically, searching for an escape route that simply did not exist. "You are Camille's father," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of the city traffic. "You do not understand. Logan is powerful. He arranged everything. He promised me a massive fortune to help him facilitate the medical transition." I laughed. It was a cold, harsh sound, devoid of any humor or warmth. "A fortune," I repeated, stepping even closer, my physical presence dominating the narrow space. "You actually believe a ruthless corporate shark who is actively murdering his own wife is going to split a $50 million payout with a degenerate gambler? You think Logan is going to hand you half of his stolen empire just because you share a bed in a 4-star hotel?" Elena swallowed hard, her manicured fingers trembling violently. "We have a solid arrangement," she insisted, though her voice cracked with sudden, intense doubt. "We are leaving the country together. We have tickets to Zurich this weekend to start a new life." I shook my head slowly, letting the devastating reality of her situation crash down upon her. "Malcolm hacked his secure travel itinerary an hour ago, Elena. He did book a private charter flight to Switzerland for Friday afternoon immediately following the final corporate acquisition meeting. But he only booked a single ticket. 1 seat, 1 passenger. There is no arrangement. There is no shared fortune." She stared at me, her eyes wide with mounting terror as the brutal truth dismantled her greedy illusions. "Do the math, doctor," I continued, relentlessly driving the psychological knife deeper into her fractured alliance. "Logan is throwing away the woman he married. What makes you think a mistress means anything to him? When the police eventually find a dead female CEO with an untraceable lethal injection in her system, who do you think takes the absolute fall? Logan has ironclad legal immunity through the fake medical guardianship you personally provided. You are the licensed medical professional handling the deadly narcotics. He is setting you up to be the sole prime suspect for a highly publicized murder while he disappears into the Swiss Alps with $50 million. You are not his partner, Elena. You are his highly disposable scapegoat." The sheer, undeniable logic of the betrayal shattered her completely. The internal greed that had fueled her horrific actions turned instantly into blinding panic. Her legs gave out and she slumped heavily against the side of her silver car, covering her face with her shaking hands. "I am a dead woman," she sobbed, the realization of her impending doom breaking her spirit entirely. "The loan sharks will kill me if I do not pay them by Saturday, and Logan is going to frame me for first-degree murder." I reached out and grabbed her firmly by the shoulder, forcing her to look up at my unyielding expression. "You have exactly 1 chance to survive this week," I told her, my tone offering a strict, unforgiving ultimatum. "You are going to help me extract Camille from that mansion tonight. If you cooperate, I will personally ensure this folder of evidence disappears, and you have a fighting chance to run from your debts. If you refuse, I will hand your murder conspiracy directly to the FBI in 10 minutes, and you will spend the rest of your miserable life in a federal penitentiary." Elena nodded frantically, her basic survival instinct completely overriding her shattered loyalty to Logan. She pulled a silver pen from her coat and frantically wrote a complex alphanumeric code on the back of a parking receipt. "This is the new, heavily encrypted biometric bypass code for the rear service entrance," she whispered, handing me the paper with trembling fingers. "The private security team does a mandatory shift rotation exactly at 2 o'clock in the morning. There is a precise 4-minute blind spot in the patrol route covering the Eastern Garden. Be at that door exactly at 2 a.m. The digital clock on my tactical watch rolled over to exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. The freezing autumn wind whipped fiercely through the barren branches of the estate gardens as Malcolm and I crouched in the absolute pitch-black shadows of the Eastern Service entrance. Malcolm was dressed in matte black tactical gear, carrying a heavy encrypted tablet that monitored the localized security frequencies. He gave me a sharp, silent nod. The 4-minute blind spot in the private security patrol had officially begun. I stepped up to the heavy reinforced steel door and punched in the complex alphanumeric biometric bypass code Dr. Elena Rostova had frantically scribbled on the back of a parking receipt just hours earlier. For a terrifying second, the keypad glowed a hostile amber. Then a soft, mechanical click echoed in the stillness. The heavy locking mechanism disengaged. I pushed the door open and we slipped silently into the sprawling, multi-million-dollar mansion. The immediate sensory assault was entirely overwhelming. This did not smell like the warm, vibrant home my daughter had joyfully purchased 3 years ago. It reeked heavily of industrial bleach, sharp rubbing alcohol, and the sickeningly sweet chemical odor of heavy intravenous sedatives. It smelled exactly like a sterile military morgue waiting for fresh casualties. We moved through the expansive catering kitchen with practiced lethal precision. Decades of hostile urban warfare had taught us how to clear a structure without making a single sound. We bypassed the grand foyer, entirely opting for the narrow, unlit servant stairs to completely avoid the primary motion sensors Logan had installed to monitor the main corridors. The silence inside the house was dense and suffocating. It was the heavy, unnatural quiet of a space where a terrible atrocity was being committed in plain sight. We reached the second-floor landing, moving like two ghosts hunting in the dark. I pushed open the heavy, solid oak double doors of the master bedroom suite. The room was bathed in the sickly, pale blue glow of a commercial medical monitoring device sitting on the bedside table. I stepped cautiously toward the massive, king-sized bed, my heart hammering violently against my rib cage. The sight that greeted me nearly brought a hardened combat veteran to his knees. Camille, my brilliant, unstoppable, beautiful girl, was lying completely motionless in the center of the vast mattress. She was terrifyingly emaciated. Her cheekbones protruded sharply against her pale, sunken skin, and the vibrant spark of life that always defined her had been entirely extinguished. Logan had not used heavy metal handcuffs or abrasive leather straps to keep her restrained. That would have left obvious physical bruising that a curious coroner might question during a post-mortem autopsy. Instead, the monster had used thick, expensive silk neckties binding her frail wrists tightly to the heavy wooden bedposts. It was a cruel, calculating method of physical captivity designed to look completely innocent to the untrained eye. Beside her arm, an intravenous drip was slowly feeding a clear, dangerous liquid directly into her veins. I leaned over the mattress, my hands shaking with a lethal mixture of profound grief and volcanic rage. "Camille," I whispered, my voice cracking as I gently brushed a tangled lock of hair from her sweating forehead. Her eyes fluttered open. They were completely vacant. The heavy, continuous dose of liquid sedatives and unauthorized narcotics had stripped her soul away, leaving behind an empty, hollow shell. She looked directly at my face, but there was absolutely no recognition in her dark, sunken eyes. She did not know she was looking at her own father. She was trapped in a terrifying chemical nightmare, unable to scream, unable to fight, and unable to understand that her execution was scheduled for tomorrow morning. The primal urge to hunt Logan down and tear him limb from limb almost overpowered my tactical discipline. I pulled my serrated tactical combat knife from the sheath strapped to my thigh. With a few swift, precise motions, I sliced cleanly through the thick silk ties binding my daughter to the heavy wooden bedposts. I rubbed her bruised wrists gently, trying to restore some basic circulation to her freezing hands, and carefully removed the intravenous needle from her arm. Malcolm was standing guard by the bedroom door, monitoring his encrypted tablet for any sudden spikes in the local security frequencies. "We are clear, Gregory," Malcolm whispered, maintaining a strict operational volume. "Let us secure the package and extract immediately before the patrol loop resets." I leaned over the mattress and gently hoisted Camille onto my broad shoulders. She weighed absolutely nothing. The vibrant, athletic woman who used to run half marathons was now as light as a fragile child. I secured my grip around her legs, ensuring she would not slip while we navigated the steep servant stairs in the dark. We moved purposefully toward the heavy oak doors. Suddenly, the harsh, aggressive screech of high-performance tires violently shattered the absolute silence of the suburban night. Malcolm's encrypted tablet instantly lit up with a barrage of bright red proximity alerts. I froze in the center of the master suite, the heavy weight of my daughter resting on my back. I looked through the gap in the heavy velvet curtains down at the expansive stone driveway. Logan's sleek custom sports car had just violently jumped the curb and skidded to a halt directly in front of the grand entrance. He was not supposed to be home until sunrise. He had explicitly told Elena they were meeting later to finalize their escape. But the arrogant bastard had returned early from a lavish celebration dinner with his corrupt corporate board members. He was drunk on expensive champagne and the absolute certainty of his impending $50 million victory. The heavy front doors unlocked with a loud electronic chime. Logan's booming drunken laughter echoed sharply up the sweeping grand staircase, bouncing off the marble walls of the foyer. The heavy, unmistakable thud of Logan's expensive leather shoes began hitting the hardwood stairs. He was marching straight up to the master suite, fully intending to check on his heavily medicated captive before passing out. I had mere seconds to make a definitive tactical decision that would determine all of our fates. I shoved Malcolm aggressively toward the heavy glass doors leading out to the expansive master balcony. "Take her over the side trellis," I commanded in a harsh, desperate whisper, transferring my daughter's frail weight directly into the arms of my most trusted brother-in-arms. "Do not stop moving until she is completely secure inside the armored truck." Malcolm nodded, his jaw set with grim military determination. He hoisted Camille effortlessly over his broad shoulder, pushed open the heavy glass doors, and slipped out into the freezing night air, descending into the dark garden below. I grabbed the handles and pulled the heavy glass doors firmly shut behind them, locking the deadbolt to ensure they were entirely sealed off from the bedroom. I did not follow them into the cold night. I turned around, dropping my heavy combat knife back into its thigh sheath. I stepped deliberately out of the master suite directly into the dimly lit second-floor hallway, closing the oak doors behind me. I squared my broad shoulders, planting my heavy combat boots firmly on the expensive Persian carpet. I stood in the center of the corridor like an impenetrable wall of pure paternal wrath, waiting in the shadows for the monster to reach the top of the stairs. The heavy thud of Logan's expensive leather shoes echoed sharply against the polished marble as he reached the top of the sweeping grand staircase. The arrogant, drunken laughter that had filled the pristine foyer just moments ago abruptly died in his throat the exact second his pale blue eyes locked onto my broad frame. I stood completely motionless in the center of the dimly lit second-floor corridor, an impenetrable wall of pure paternal wrath. The air between us cracked with a lethal, volatile tension. For a brief, fleeting moment, absolute shock washed over his perfectly manicured face. He had expected to find his drugged wife lying helpless in bed, not a hardened combat veteran waiting for him in the shadows. But Logan was a ruthless corporate predator who thrived on sudden chaos and conflict. The initial shock melted instantly into a dark, twisted smirk. He reached smoothly inside the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket. The metallic scrape of a concealed weapon being drawn broke the heavy silence of the house. Logan pulled out a compact 9mm handgun, raising it with practiced ease and pointing the black steel barrel directly at the center of my chest. The sharp mechanical click of the safety disengaging echoed loudly down the long hallway. He did not look like a terrified homeowner facing a midnight intruder. He looked absolutely thrilled. "Well, well, well," Logan chuckled, his breath heavy with the sour stench of expensive champagne and unfiltered malice. "Look exactly what the cat dragged in tonight. The crazy, violent military veteran violating a Supreme Court restraining order and breaking into my private residence in the dead of night. You just handed me the absolute perfect scenario on a silver platter, Gregory. I can shoot you right here in my own hallway, and the corrupt legal system you despise so much will pin a medal on my chest for defending my property from a dangerous lunatic." I did not flinch. I did not raise my hands in surrender. My extensive combat training kept my heart rate perfectly steady while staring down the dark barrel of a loaded weapon. "Go ahead and pull the trigger," I challenged, my voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the quiet hall. "Let us see how your perfect, heroic narrative holds up when the police search the house and find your wife completely missing from her medical prison." Logan laughed loudly, waving the barrel of the handgun slightly as if he were conducting a twisted symphony. He was completely intoxicated by his own perceived invincibility and the heavy liquor coursing through his veins. "You really think you can outsmart me, old man?" he mocked, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "You think you can swoop in here like some outdated action hero and save the day? You are nothing but a forgotten relic, a washed-up soldier who does not understand how the modern world operates. The real world operates on ironclad contracts, permanent ink, and massive amounts of money. And as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, I own the entire board." He stepped even closer, the dark barrel of the gun remaining leveled steadily at my heart. His eyes were wide and manic, fueled by pure, unadulterated greed. I do not care if you manage to get Camille out of this house. Logan spat, his voice dripping with venomous contempt. It does not matter to me anymore. Her physical presence is entirely irrelevant to my ultimate victory. I got exactly what I needed from her useless, drugged body. She signed the final corporate transfer documents this afternoon before she passed out from the sedatives. The ink is completely dry. The $50 million corporate acquisition is officially locked in stone. Logan leaned forward, his face twisted into a mask of pure, triumphant cruelty. Tomorrow morning at 9 sharp, the rival conglomerate executives are countersigning the final page in a downtown boardroom. The exact second that pen lifts from the paper, $50 million will be wired directly into my untraceable offshore holding accounts. By the time the local authorities scrape your dead body off my expensive hardwood floor, I will be on a private jet flying over the Atlantic with my new partner. You tried to play chess with a Master Gregory, but you lost spectacularly. You are going to die right here in a pool of your own blood labeled a psychotic home invader, and your brilliant, precious daughter will be dumped in a state-run psychiatric ward completely penniless and heavily sedated for the rest of her miserable short life. My victory is absolute, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. I stood perfectly still, letting his manic, arrogant gloating wash over me like a cold, harmless breeze. He was a man who worshipped fraudulent paperwork and truly believed that a few forged signatures on a legal document made him a god. But he was about to learn a devastating lesson about the actual structural foundation of the empire he was trying to steal. The corners of my mouth curled upward into a cold, hard, humorless smile. I looked past the dark barrel of his loaded weapon directly into his arrogant, pale blue eyes. "You are a brilliant accountant, Logan," I stated, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any fear. "You know exactly how to manipulate spreadsheets, forge bank transfers, and bribe corrupt medical professionals to do your dirty work. You know exactly how to build a beautiful, complex house of cards, but you are a terrible engineer." Logan's twisted smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, his brow furrowed in sudden, genuine confusion. The heavy gun in his hand wavered ever so slightly. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded, gripping the weapon tighter to mask his sudden rising insecurity. I took a slow, deliberate step toward the barrel of the gun, closing the dangerous distance between us. "I am talking about the actual raw technology you think you just sold for $50 million, I replied, my voice echoing with crushing, unyielding authority. "You spent all your time plotting to steal the corporate shell, but you never bothered to inspect the actual engine driving the machine. Tell me, Logan, did you carefully read Clause 4, Section B in Camille's original copyright certification for the core medical algorithm?" The color began to drain rapidly from Logan's flushed face. His arrogant posture cracked under the immense weight of my words. "What clause?" he stammered, the alcohol-fueled confidence suddenly evaporating entirely from his system. "What are you talking about?" I smiled like a predator exposing its teeth right before the kill. "The core algorithmic logic that makes her entire company worth $50 million does not belong to her, Logan. It never did. It is legally bound by a strict foundational mechanics patent. If you had bothered to read Clause 4, Section B, you would know that any corporate sale or transfer of that specific technology is absolutely null and void without the direct notarized countersignature of the original patent holder." The devastating realization hit Logan like a massive physical blow to the head. His hand shook violently, and the gun lowered a few critical inches toward the floor. The $50 million empire he thought he had completely secured was suddenly crumbling into worthless dust right in front of his eyes. "Who is the patent holder?" he choked out, his voice laced with absolute raw, blinding panic. I just stared at him, letting the terrifying truth dawn on him completely. "I filed that mechanical patent 10 years ago while I was still working in the military engineering course. You just sold an empty box." Logan's eyes widened in sheer, absolute horror. "No," he gasped, taking a frantic, unsteady step backward. "That is impossible. The legal documents are in the master safe." He spun around, entirely forgetting about the loaded gun in his hand and the dangerous man standing right in front of him. He bolted frantically down the hallway, tearing open the heavy oak door to his private study to desperately check the physical files locked in his reinforced wall safe. He needed to see his massive failure with his own eyes. The exact second his back was turned, I moved with explosive military speed. I did not waste a single moment trying to disarm a panicked, desperate man. The mission was extraction, not assassination. I sprinted back into the master bedroom, vaulting smoothly over the heavy wooden balcony railing. I slid rapidly down the thick stone trellis, dropping the last 10 feet directly onto the cold, wet grass below. The heavy diesel engine of Malcolm's armored tactical truck was already roaring in the dark alleyway behind the estate. I sprinted through the shadows, ripped open the heavy passenger door, and threw myself inside. Camille was secured safely in the reinforced back cabin, breathing steadily and wrapped in a heavy thermal tactical blanket. "Hit it!" I roared to Malcolm. The heavy tires spun wildly, gripping the wet asphalt as we tore out of the wealthy suburban neighborhood, leaving Logan trapped entirely alone in his massive empty mansion, holding a loaded gun and a completely worthless stack of paper. The tires of Malcolm's heavily armored tactical truck screamed against the wet asphalt as we tore out of the wealthy suburban grid. I knelt in the reinforced back cabin, keeping 2 firm fingers pressed tightly against Camille's fragile wrist. Her pulse was dangerously slow and her breathing was horribly shallow. Logan and his corrupt mistress had pumped her full of enough heavy industrial sedatives to drop a full-grown horse. I could not take her to a standard public hospital. Logan possessed that fraudulent Supreme Court medical guardianship. The exact second I walked through the sliding glass doors of a public emergency room, the hospital administrators would be legally obligated to notify him and have me arrested for kidnapping. We needed an off-the-grid medical sanctuary. Malcolm navigated the dark city streets with flawless military precision, heading straight for the industrial sector. We pulled up to a heavily fortified concrete building surrounded by high razor-wire fences. It was a private, undisclosed medical clinic fully funded and operated by an elite network of combat veterans. The chief medical officer was Dr. Aris, a former frontline trauma surgeon who owed his life to my engineering unit in Fallujah. Aris did not ask any bureaucratic questions. The heavy steel doors rolled open, and a team of trusted veteran medics rushed out with a specialized gurney. We wheeled Camille directly into a secure, sterile trauma bay. Aris immediately analyzed her severely dilated pupils and hooked her up to a massive hemodialysis machine. We need to actively filter the heavy neurotoxins directly out of her bloodstream. Aris commanded his team, moving with rapid, synchronized military efficiency. "It is going to be a brutal, aggressive detox process, Gregory, but we will get your girl back." I stood rigidly in the corner of the blindingly bright medical bay, watching the thick, clear tubes pull the poisoned blood from her arm, run it through the advanced filtration system, and pump it back into her frail body. The extraction was successfully completed, but the war was far from over. I leaned heavily against the cold, sterile wall of the clinic, crossing my thick arms over my chest. I watched the rhythmic pulsing of the dialysis machine, systematically cleaning the lethal toxins from my daughter's system. As I stood there listening to the steady mechanical hum of the life-saving equipment, my mind drifted back to the absolute core foundation of Camille's massive $50 million empire. Logan considered himself a financial genius. He was a man who worshipped spreadsheets, profit margins, and corporate loopholes. He looked at me and saw nothing but a washed-up, elderly black combat veteran. He vastly underestimated the raw intellect required to build the actual structural foundation of a modern technology company. Camille was undeniably a brilliant software architect. She coded the revolutionary artificial intelligence diagnostic algorithms that made her startup an overnight sensation in the medical technology sector. But software requires highly specialized hardware to function in the real world. 15 years ago, long before Camille ever met that arrogant monster, I was working as a senior mechanical engineer for the Department of Defense. I spent years designing and perfecting highly advanced fluid dynamics pumps for portable battlefield trauma kits. I officially registered and fully secured the foundational mechanical patents for that specific biometric valve design tightly under my own name. When Camille decided to launch her ambitious healthcare startup, she realized her brilliant diagnostic software needed a flawless physical delivery system to administer precise microdoses of medication. I proudly gave my ambitious daughter unlimited free access to use my military-grade mechanical architecture as the physical shell for her revolutionary software. We integrated my patented hardware with her groundbreaking code, creating an unprecedented medical device. It was the perfect symbiotic partnership between a father and his brilliant daughter. But I never legally transferred the actual ownership of the original mechanical patent to her corporate entity. It remained safely and securely registered in my name, locked away in a federal database. That undeniable legal fact was the absolute fatal flaw in Logan's flawless $50 million heist. He had spent months meticulously isolating my daughter, heavily drugging her mind and bribing corrupt medical professionals to declare her legally incompetent. He had successfully manipulated the Supreme Court to grant him absolute financial and medical guardianship over her entire life. He had forcefully guided her limp, unconscious hand to sign the massive corporate transfer documents officially selling her entire enterprise to a ruthless rival conglomerate. But Logan was a greedy, impatient financial officer who only cared about the final payout numbers. He never bothered to carefully read the dense, complex engineering blueprints or the foundational legal charters of the company he was actively stealing. Clause 4. Section B of the Primary Corporate Acquisition Charter explicitly mandated that the proprietary diagnostic software could not be sold licensed or legally transferred to any purchasing entity without the irrevocable transfer of the foundational hardware patent. Camille's forced signature only legally surrendered the office furniture, the company laptops, and the brand name. It completely failed to transfer the actual multi-million-dollar intellectual property. The massive rival conglomerate was paying $50 million specifically for the rights to manufacture and distribute that integrated medical device. By ignoring the engineering patents, Logan had effectively sold them a highly expensive luxury vehicle entirely missing its engine. His signature was completely legally worthless without my direct notarized authorization. He thought he had outsmarted a senile old man, but I had structurally outflanked him a decade before he even entered our lives. Logan was currently sitting in his empty mansion holding a signed contract that was nothing more than a worthless stack of paper. He was trying to execute the largest corporate theft of his life, but he was attempting to sell a heavy steel safe without possessing the combination. The rival executives sitting in the downtown boardroom tomorrow morning were going to tear him to absolute pieces the second their legal team reviewed the incomplete patent transfers. The harsh fluorescent lights of the private veteran clinic buzzed quietly as the early morning sun began to rise over the city. Dr. Aris checked Camille's vital signs, noting that her heart rate was finally stabilizing as the heavy sedatives were aggressively flushed from her system. Suddenly, the heavy, reinforced door of the medical bay swung open. Malcolm stepped inside, his face set in a grim, rigid mask. He handed me his encrypted tactical tablet, the screen glowing brightly in the dim room. "You need to see this right now, Gregory." Malcolm stated, his voice low and incredibly tense. "The bastard is officially going on the offensive." I looked down at the high-definition screen. It was a live broadcast from the major local morning news network. Logan was standing squarely in front of his massive iron gates, surrounded by a swarm of eager reporters and flashing camera lights. He looked completely disheveled. His expensive tailored shirt was wrinkled, his hair was messy, and he had aggressively rubbed his eyes to make them look red and swollen. He was putting on the absolute performance of a lifetime. Early this morning, my severely mentally ill father-in-law violently broke into my home. Logan choked out, forcing a highly convincing sob for the rolling cameras. He is suffering from rapid onset dementia and extreme violent paranoia. He physically attacked me and kidnapped my sick, defenseless wife. She requires urgent, constant medical care to survive. Please, I am begging the public. Help me bring my beautiful wife home before he accidentally kills her. The news anchor immediately cut to a graphic displaying my face alongside a massive bright red warning banner. An emergency statewide alert had just been issued. Logan had brilliantly weaponized the media, transforming me into a dangerous wanted fugitive and completely manipulating public sympathy to cover his tracks. The entire state police force was now actively hunting me down. I sat in the dimly lit security room of the veteran clinic watching the absolute nightmare unfold across a bank of glowing digital monitors. Logan had not just sparked a localized suburban manhunt. He had ignited a massive statewide media frenzy of epic proportions. Every major news channel and social media platform was relentlessly broadcasting my face. They used an old, stern military photograph of me from my service days, stripping away any honorable context and plastering the words "armed and dangerous" in bold red letters across the bottom of the screen. I was officially classified as a high-profile, volatile fugitive. The twisted narrative Logan spun for the hungry press was flawlessly wicked. He played the devastated, loving husband so perfectly that the general public swallowed the venomous lie without a single second of hesitation. Pundits and daytime commentators tore my reputation apart on live television, branding me as a psychotic, violent veteran suffering from severe, untreated combat trauma and rapid onset dementia. They aggressively analyzed my extensive military background, twisting my decades of honorable overseas service into definitive proof that I was a lethal ticking time bomb capable of murdering my own daughter in a paranoid delusion. My secure phone buzzed with continuous alerts from Malcolm's encrypted network showing angry digital mobs gathering online, spewing venomous hatred and actively demanding my immediate incarceration. The local police department had already established heavily armed tactical checkpoints on all major highways leading out of the city limits. Law enforcement helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras were actively sweeping the suburban perimeters and wooded areas. I was completely boxed in and officially branded a violent madman by a society that had absolutely no idea they were actively cheering for the real monster. But I did not let the intense public outrage break my tactical focus. I was a trained ghost operating in my own city, and a ghost does not panic when the living start screaming in fear. I stepped away from the glowing surveillance monitors and walked deliberately into a soundproof communication bunker located deep within the subterranean levels of the clinic. Malcolm was already seated at the heavy steel console, his fingers flying rapidly across a customized mechanical keyboard as he actively routed a secure audio signal through half a dozen international proxy servers. I needed to bypass the chaotic media circus entirely and strike directly at the corporate heart of Logan's $50 million operation. The primary board of directors for Camille's health technology company held the ultimate legal veto power over the impending hostile acquisition. If I could effectively expose Logan's fraudulent medical guardianship and reveal the fatal catastrophic flaw in the mechanical hardware patents to the executive board, the entire massive sale would instantly collapse before the ink could even touch the final paper. Malcolm handed me a heavy matte black satellite phone. "The connection is entirely secure and completely untraceable," he stated, his voice a low, steady rumble in the quiet bunker. "I have successfully patched you directly into the highly restricted conference bridge they are currently using to finalize the lucrative logistics for tomorrow morning's buyout." I pressed the heavy device to my ear and listened closely to the crisp, professional voices of 3 senior board members discussing stock options and massive executive severance packages. I instantly recognized the arrogant nasal tone of Bradley Thompson, the lead independent director who had always deeply resented my daughter's rapid rise to power and immense industry influence. I cleared my throat, my voice cutting through their greedy corporate chatter like a sharp, heavy steel blade. "Listen to me very carefully, gentlemen," I commanded, projecting the absolute unwavering authority of a seasoned military commander. "This is Gregory, Camille's father. The corporate acquisition you are preparing to finalize tomorrow morning is a massive, highly illegal fraud. Logan has heavily drugged his own wife, forged severe medical psychiatric evaluations, and isolated her completely to steal this $50 million enterprise. You need to halt all ongoing negotiations with the rival conglomerate immediately." A heavy, dead silence fell over the encrypted conference line for a few incredibly tense seconds. Then a low, mocking chuckle echoed through the high-definition speaker. It was Bradley Thompson. His laughter was thick with arrogant, unadulterated contempt. Well, the famous fugitive father finally speaks," Bradley sneered, entirely unbothered by my severe, desperate warning. "We were genuinely wondering when you might pop up, Gregory. I just watched your highly impressive mugshot flash across the morning financial news networks. Tell me, are you currently broadcasting your wild, paranoid delusions from a damp suburban cave, or have you barricaded yourself in a fortified basement somewhere?" My grip tightened aggressively on the heavy satellite phone until the thick plastic casing actually groaned under the immense physical pressure. "I am officially holding the original foundational mechanical patents for the core diagnostic technology I warned them, keeping my tone deadly calm and measured despite the raging explosive fire burning in my chest. If you sign that buyout agreement tomorrow without my explicit notarized legal authorization, you are committing massive federal fraud, and the purchasing conglomerate will tear you all to pieces in a federal courtroom." Bradley let out another sharp, entirely dismissive laugh. "Save your ridiculous, dramatic military bluffing for the armed police negotiators, old man," he retorted coldly. "Logan fully briefed the executive board on your tragic, severe mental decline weeks ago. We have already meticulously reviewed the Supreme Court medical guardianship documents. They are legally ironclad. Furthermore, Logan has brilliantly negotiated highly lucrative accelerated payout bonuses for every single board member, the exact second this $50 million deal officially clears escrow. We are absolutely not going to let a violently unstable, hallucinating elderly man ruin the biggest financial victory of our entire professional careers. You are completely delusional, Gregory. Turn yourself in before the state SWAT team puts a sniper bullet in your head. The secure line went completely dead with a sharp electronic click. They had not just been foolishly tricked by Logan. They had been actively and aggressively bought off. The entire corporate executive board was fully complicit, entirely blinded by the promise of massive golden parachutes. They were perfectly willing to let their brilliant founder die a heavily medicated captive as long as their offshore bank accounts were flooded with illegal cash. I slowly lowered the dead satellite phone and placed it carefully onto the cold steel console. The diplomatic corporate approach had completely and utterly failed. The final boardroom meeting was officially scheduled to take place at 9 o'clock sharp tomorrow morning at the towering downtown corporate headquarters. I had less than 14 hours to strategically orchestrate a full frontal assault on a glass fortress filled with corrupt executives and a ruthless, murderous son-in-law, all while being aggressively hunted by every single law enforcement agency in the state. I walked out of the communication bunker and stepped quietly into the sterile observation corridor outside the secure trauma bay. I stood perfectly still behind the heavy reinforced glass window, watching the rhythmic, pulsing lights of the advanced medical monitors. Dr. Eris was leaning closely over my daughter's frail, resting body, carefully adjusting a complicated intravenous line. He picked up a small, clear glass vial containing a specialized, highly concentrated chemical neutralizing agent. I watched silently as he injected the final, crucial dose of the potent antidote directly into her bloodstream, to completely and aggressively flush the last lingering traces of Logan's heavy, illicit sedatives from her neurological system. The final dangerous countdown had officially started, and the ultimate battlefield was completely set. I watched through the heavy, reinforced glass as the final dose of the neutralizing agent surged through the clear plastic tubing and directly into my daughter's veins. For 10 agonizing minutes, the sterile trauma bay was entirely silent, except for the steady rhythmic beeping of the advanced cardiac monitors. Then her fingers twitched. It was not the involuntary chemical tremor I had seen back at Logan's mansion. It was a deliberate, conscious movement. Camille drew a sharp, sudden breath, her chest arching off the medical cot as her lungs desperately pulled in the cool, sterile air of the clinic. Her eyes snapped open. The dull, vacant fog that had clouded her vision for 4 brutal months was completely gone. She blinked rapidly, fighting against the harsh, glaring fluorescent lights mounted on the ceiling. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped quickly to her bedside, my heart pounding with a fierce mixture of profound relief and lingering anxiety. "Camille." I whispered, my voice thick with emotion as I gently grasped her frail, trembling hand. "Dad." She croaked, her throat incredibly dry and raw from severe dehydration. Her voice was weak, but the undeniable spark of raw intelligence had officially returned to her dark brown eyes. She squeezed my fingers tightly, grounding herself in reality. "My head," she groaned, raising her free hand to press against her throbbing temples. "It feels like a massive steel hammer is relentlessly pounding against my skull. What happened to me? Where am I?" Dr. Eris stepped back, giving us space but keeping a close, watchful eye on the vital monitors. "You are in a secure, undisclosed medical facility, Camille," I answered, maintaining a calm, steady tone to keep her grounded. "The severe 4-month chemical delirium is officially over. You are completely safe now, and you are fully awake." I did not waste time treating her like a fragile, broken victim. Camille had built a $50 million empire from scratch. She possessed a brilliant analytical mind, and she deserved the absolute, unvarnished truth immediately. I pulled Malcolm's encrypted tactical tablet from my heavy canvas jacket and placed it directly on the steel tray table hovering over her bed. "Logan has been heavily drugging you with unauthorized industrial sedatives for months," I stated, keeping my voice strictly factual and devoid of any softening pity. "He aggressively weaponized the legal and medical systems to declare you entirely mentally incompetent." Camille stared at me, her sharp mind racing to process the horrific magnitude of my words. I tapped the tablet screen, pulling up the stark, irrefutable evidence. I showed her the official bank statements provided by Richard at the downtown branch. Her eyes widened slightly as she analyzed the bold red numbers, confirming that $400,000 had been illegally wired out of our joint trust fund directly into Logan's untraceable offshore accounts. I swiped the screen again, revealing the fraudulent Supreme Court medical guardianship documents and the fabricated psychiatric evaluation, signed by Dr. Elena Rostova. He effectively locked you in your own bedroom and stole your legal autonomy, Camille, I explained, watching her jaw tense with rising comprehension. He is actively finalizing a massive hostile corporate acquisition of your entire health technology company at 9 o'clock this morning. He plans to pocket the entire $50 million buyout. But the final piece of evidence was the most devastating. I opened the secure audio file Malcolm had successfully intercepted from the underground casino parking lot. I pressed play. The digital speakers echoed with Logan's cold, arrogant voice conversing with his corrupt mistress. I do not care if she is conscious enough to fight back. Logan's voice sneered through the quiet medical bay. Just keep her heavily sedated and compliant. As soon as the $50 million buyout hits the offshore accounts, we are proceeding with the final phase. She is a dying bitch anyway. The local coroner will rule it a tragic but completely natural cardiac event brought on by extreme stress. The audio recording ended with a sharp digital click, leaving a suffocating silence in the sterile room. Logan had not just planned a corporate coup. He had meticulously orchestrated her flawless, untraceable murder. I stood by the edge of the medical cot, bracing myself for the entirely justified emotional breakdown. Any normal person would have shattered into a million pieces upon hearing their own husband callously plot their execution. I expected heavy, uncontrollable sobbing or a violent panic attack. But Camille did not shed a single tear. She did not scream or break down in blinding despair. The brilliant, formidable woman who had ruthlessly dominated the competitive tech industry simply closed her eyes for exactly 5 seconds. When she opened them again, the lingering physical weakness had completely vanished. Her dark eyes had hardened into twin blocks of absolute razor-sharp ice. The profound betrayal did not break her spirit. It instantly forged her anger into a lethal, highly focused weapon. She looked down at the complex network of medical tubes taped securely to her bruised arms. "Dr. Eris," she commanded, her voice suddenly ringing with the unmistakable authoritative cadence of a powerful chief executive officer. "Remove these intravenous lines from my arms immediately." Eris stepped forward, his brow furrowing with genuine medical concern. "Camille, your physical system has just endured a massive aggressive chemical detox," he cautioned gently. "Your internal organs are under severe stress and your blood pressure is still dangerously volatile. You are severely dehydrated and you need at least 48 hours of continuous supervised rest." Camille did not even blink. She reached over with her good hand and grabbed the thick plastic tubing connecting the needle to the dialysis machine. Her grip was shaking slightly from muscle fatigue, but her absolute determination was terrifyingly clear. "If you do not remove this needle in the next 3 seconds, doctor, I will rip it out of my own vein and bleed all over your pristine floor," she stated, her tone entirely devoid of any bluffing. "I have a $50 million company to protect and a severely overdue corporate firing to execute. I will not do either of those things while chained to a hospital bed like a helpless victim." Eris looked at me seeking guidance. I gave him a short, definitive nod. I knew my daughter better than anyone. There was no stopping her now. Eris sighed heavily and swiftly removed the medical tape, pulling the sharp needle safely from her bruised vein and applying a tight pressure bandage. Camille swung her bare legs over the edge of the elevated medical cot. Her bare feet hit the cold, sterile tile floor. Her knees buckled instantly under her own frail weight, but I was already there, catching her securely by the shoulders before she could fall. She leaned heavily against my broad chest, taking a deep, ragged breath to steady her spinning head. She pushed herself upright, locking her joints and standing tall despite the severe physical exhaustion threatening to pull her back down. She looked at the cheap, thin, cotton medical gown they had dressed her in when we arrived at the clinic. She grabbed the flimsy fabric with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Dad," she said, her voice ringing with a cold, lethal clarity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Get me a tailored suit, a black one, and find me a pair of heels. I do not care what you have to do or who you have to call to get them here in the next 20 minutes. We have a massive corporate board meeting to attend downtown, and we have the head of a miserable traitor to chop off in front of his new business partners." The hunt was officially on. The morning sun violently pierced the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the sprawling corporate headquarters on the 40th floor. The executive boardroom was a masterclass in modern corporate intimidation, featuring a massive polished mahogany table and sleek ergonomic leather chairs. Sitting squarely at the head of the table, exuding absolute untouchable power, was Logan. He was wearing an immaculate charcoal gray Armani suit, his silk tie perfectly knotted, his hair styled with expensive precision. He looked absolutely triumphant. Resting directly in front of him on the polished wood was a thick stack of heavy legal documents. It was the finalized corporate acquisition contract. The $50 million hostile takeover of my daughter's entire life work was just a few pen strokes away from becoming an irreversible legal reality. Flanking the long table were 5 senior executives from the rival medical conglomerate wearing equally expensive suits and eager predatory expressions. Sitting immediately to Logan's right was Bradley Thompson, the corrupt independent board member who had aggressively mocked me on the encrypted satellite phone just yesterday. Bradley was practically salivating, staring at the thick contract with unadulterated greed. Logan casually checked the heavy gold Rolex on his left wrist, a luxury timepiece he had purchased using stolen funds from Camille's joint trust account. He picked up a thick gold-plated fountain pen, rolling it smoothly between his manicured fingers. He flashed a brilliant, charming smile at the rival executives across the table. His teeth were perfectly white, his demeanor incredibly relaxed. He did not look like a ruthless monster who had spent the last 4 months chemically torturing his wife in a locked bedroom. He looked like a brilliant young visionary standing on the absolute precipice of a historic financial victory. The room was perfectly silent, waiting for the final signature to seal the massive transaction. Logan recognized the heavy silence in the boardroom and knew exactly how to play his captive audience. He was a master manipulator who understood that sealing a $50 million acquisition required a flawless theatrical performance. He slowly lowered the gold fountain pen and let out a long, shaky sigh. He deliberately allowed his perfect smile to falter, replacing it with a mask of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. He reached up and pinched the bridge of his nose subtly, rubbing his eyes to simulate the exhausted, unshed tears of a devastated husband. "Gentlemen," Logan began, his voice dropping into a husky, emotionally strained register that echoed softly across the long mahogany table. "I want to personally thank all of you for your incredible patience and discretion during this incredibly difficult transition. Selling this company is the hardest professional and personal decision I have ever had to make in my entire life. Camille built this revolutionary technology with her bare hands. It was her absolute dream." He paused strategically, looking down at the thick contract as if the very sight of the paper caused him immense physical pain. The older rival executives leaned forward, their faces softening with genuine human sympathy. They were completely buying every single poisonous word falling from his lying mouth. "But her severe mental decline has left me with absolutely no other choice," Logan continued, his voice cracking perfectly on cue. "The violent dementia and aggressive paranoia have completely consumed the brilliant woman I married. The specialized round-the-clock psychiatric care she requires at the secure facility in Switzerland is astronomically expensive. Liquidating her corporate assets is the only viable way I can ensure my poor sick wife gets the experimental medical treatments she desperately needs to survive. It is a tragedy, but I have to put her health above her business." Bradley Thompson placed a heavy, comforting hand on Logan's tailored shoulder, playing the role of the supportive colleague flawlessly. "You are doing the right thing," Logan Bradley stated firmly, projecting false solemnity to the rival buyers. "Camille would want you to make the tough calls to protect her." The executives across the table nodded in deep, respectful agreement, completely blinded by the emotional manipulation. Logan let out one final dramatic sigh and unscrewed the cap of the gold fountain pen. He hovered the sharp metallic nib directly over the primary signature line, ready to officially steal $50 million. Before the expensive gold ink could even touch the crisp white paper, a deafening explosive crash violently shattered the quiet professionalism of the 40th floor. The heavy double-glass doors of the executive boardroom were kicked open with such raw, brutal force that the electronic magnetic locks completely splintered. The heavy glass slammed aggressively against the interior walls, cracking the sleek drywall. I stepped squarely into the center of the pristine boardroom. I was still wearing my heavy canvas military jacket, smelling of the cold morning air and the sterile scent of the veteran trauma clinic. The room erupted into absolute instant chaos. The rival executives jumped up from their ergonomic leather chairs, shouting in alarm and knocking over expensive crystal water glasses. Bradley Thompson leaped to his feet, his face turning completely pale as he recognized me from the statewide television broadcasts. "Security," Bradley screamed, pointing a trembling finger directly at my chest. Get building security up here immediately. Logan's fake tears vanished in a fraction of a second. The mask of the grieving husband was instantly replaced by a look of sheer malicious glee. He jumped back from the table, pointing the heavy gold fountain pen at me like a weapon. "That is him!" Logan shouted, his voice echoing with aggressive manufactured panic. "That is my violently unstable father-in-law. He is a wanted fugitive. He kidnapped my wife." Two heavily armed private security guards who had been stationed in the outer hallway rushed into the boardroom. They drew their heavy steel batons and unclipped their metal handcuffs, moving with rapid aggressive force. They grabbed my arms violently, twisting them behind my back to subdue the supposed dangerous threat. I did not fight them. I did not throw a single punch or try to break their grip. I simply stood there like an immovable mountain of solid stone, smiling a cold, terrifying smile directly at Logan. "Go ahead and sign the paper, Logan." I challenged, my voice a low, dangerous rumble that easily cut through the shouting executives. "Sign the document. Sell the empty box." Logan sneered, his pale blue eyes flashing with arrogant triumph. "Drag this madman out to the police right now," Logan commanded the guards. "I am finishing this deal." The heavy-set security guards pulled aggressively on my shoulders, attempting to drag me backward toward the shattered glass doors. But then a sharp, rhythmic sound echoed clearly from the polished marble hallway outside. Click, click, click. It was the unmistakable, sharp striking sound of stiletto heels hitting the hard stone floor with deliberate, measured precision. The heavy, forceful footsteps of the security guards abruptly faltered. They froze in place, looking over their shoulders toward the corridor. Logan's arrogant, triumphant smirk completely froze on his face. The color aggressively drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. He stared blankly at the shattered doorway, his breathing completely stopping in his chest. Camille walked slowly into the center of the devastated boardroom. She was wearing a perfectly tailored pitch-black designer suit that hung slightly loose on her severely depleted frame. She was undeniably gaunt. Her sharp cheekbones protruded visibly against her pale skin, showcasing the brutal physical toll of the 4-month chemical torture she had just endured. But her posture was absolute, unyielding steel. She stood incredibly tall, radiating a lethal, overwhelming authority that instantly suffocated every single man in the room. The dark brown eyes that had been completely vacant and heavily drugged just hours ago were now blazing with a cold, calculated fury. The entire chaotic boardroom dropped into a dead, paralyzed silence. The security guards immediately released my arms, stepping back in sheer confusion. The rival executives stared in absolute shock at the woman they had just been told was permanently locked away in a violent psychiatric ward. Logan's hand began to shake violently. The heavy gold fountain pen slipped completely through his trembling fingers. It hit the polished mahogany table with a loud, sharp clatter that echoed like a gunshot in the frozen room. The heavy gold fountain pen clattered against the polished mahogany table, echoing like a final death knell in the paralyzed boardroom. Logan stared at his wife as if he were looking at a terrifying, vengeful apparition returning directly from the grave. For a fraction of a second, his advanced calculating brain completely short-circuited. He realized with absolute, unadulterated horror that his flawless medical narrative was rapidly unraveling in front of 20 elite industry executives, and his incredibly lucrative $50 million payday was slipping right through his shaking fingers. But Logan was a master psychological manipulator who had spent his entire adult life talking his way out of catastrophic situations. He instantly recognized that his only chance to salvage this massive corporate acquisition was to lean heavily into his fabricated role as the devastated, loving husband. The color aggressively rushed back into his pale face as he forced a look of overwhelming, desperate relief. He practically leaped away from the heavy leather chair, rushing around the long table with his arms stretched wide open. "Camille," he gasped, his voice cracking with a perfectly manufactured emotional sob. "Oh my God, you are actually awake! The private doctors told me you were completely lost in a permanent state of severe psychosis." He was moving quickly, aggressively, trying to smother her in a tight physical embrace. He wanted to aggressively restrict her physical movement, whisper a vicious threat directly into her ear, and quietly usher her out of the boardroom under the guise of urgent medical concern. I stood a few feet away, crossing my arms over my heavy canvas jacket, watching his pathetic, sickening performance unfold. He actually believed he could still gaslight an entire room of seasoned corporate sharks while silencing the brilliant woman he had spent 4 agonizing months chemically torturing. He expected Camille to be physically frail, medically confused, and entirely submissive to his domineering presence. He could not have been more catastrophically wrong. Logan lunged forward, fully intending to wrap his arms around her thin, emaciated frame to trap her. But Camille did not retreat a single inch. She did not cower or shrink away from her ruthless abuser. She planted her designer heels firmly onto the polished marble floor, anchoring her core with absolute iron resolve. She channeled every single ounce of her profound betrayal, every agonizing night locked in that dark, sterile bedroom, and every single drop of the 4-month chemical torture directly into her right hand. As Logan leaned in with his fake tears to grab her shoulders, Camille swung her arm with a blinding explosive velocity. A resounding bone-rattling smack violently cracked through the silent corporate boardroom. The sheer physical impact of the heavy slap was so incredibly fierce that it instantly shattered Logan's arrogant momentum. The brutal force caught him directly across the jaw, violently snapping his head to the side with a sickening crack. He lost his footing entirely, his expensive leather shoes slipping aggressively on the smooth marble floor. Logan crashed hard onto the ground, tumbling backward in a humiliating, chaotic heap. His immaculate charcoal gray suit crumpled and tore against the sharp edge of a heavy metal chair leg. The 20 senior executives and corrupt board members let out a collective synchronized gasp of pure, unadulterated shock. Bradley Thompson, the corrupt board member who had mocked me, jumped backward so fast he nearly tipped his own expensive leather chair over. I stood perfectly still, watching the incredibly satisfying physical destruction of my son-in-law's massive, unearned ego. Logan sprawled pathetically on the cold stone floor, holding his rapidly swelling jaw in absolute disbelief. A thick, dark line of bright red blood began to trickle slowly down his chin from a busted lower lip. He stared up at Camille, his eyes wide with genuine, raw, terrifying realization. "Do not ever put your filthy, murderous hands on me again," Camille commanded, her voice a low, lethal whisper that carried the terrifying weight of absolute corporate and personal authority. Camille did not spare him another second of her valuable time. She stepped right over Logan's trembling, sprawling body as if he were nothing more than a disgusting piece of garbage blocking her path to the head of the table. She walked with relentless, measured purpose directly toward the rival executives who were frozen in their seats. She reached inside the inner pocket of her sharp-tailored black blazer and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of clinical and financial documents. She raised her hand and slammed the heavy folder directly on top of the $50 million acquisition contract. The loud, aggressive thud made several rival executives visibly flinch backward. "Gentlemen," Camille announced, looking directly into the terrified, wide eyes of the lead purchasing executive. "Before any of you foolishly sign a massive $50 million check and commit to a hostile takeover, you might want to carefully review the verified toxicology reports of the chief executive officer you are supposedly buying out." She pointed a sharp, manicured finger at the top medical document displaying the stark laboratory results. "Right there is undeniable scientific proof that I have been systematically and intentionally poisoned with heavy industrial sedatives for 4 excruciating months by the man bleeding on your floor." She aggressively flipped to the next page, exposing the bold red numbers from the downtown private wealth bank. And underneath that severe medical evidence is a verified international wire transfer log. It proves conclusively that my husband has been actively siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars into untraceable offshore shell accounts in the Cayman Islands. She placed both of her hands firmly on the edge of the polished mahogany table, leaning forward to deliver the ultimate devastating corporate blow. Her dark brown eyes pierced through the greedy corporate facade of every single man in the room, commanding absolute terrifying respect. "Are you seriously planning to purchase a global health technology empire from a corrupt, desperate man who is actively trying to murder its founder and CEO to steal the profits?" The lead rival executive turned a sickening shade of pale gray. The absolute magnitude of the massive legal and criminal liability he was about to step into crashed over him like a devastating tidal wave. He realized instantly that signing that fraudulent document would implicate his entire multinational conglomerate in a massive federal murder conspiracy and severe financial embezzlement. Without saying a single word, he reached out, grabbed the thick $50 million acquisition contract, and aggressively tore it completely in half, dropping the shredded pieces onto the table as if the paper itself were heavily radioactive. Seeing his massive, historic financial victory shredded into literal garbage, Logan completely snapped. His carefully crafted, charming corporate mask shattered into a million jagged, irreparable pieces. He scrambled up from the marble floor, his face twisted with raw, venomous, animalistic rage. He wiped the blood from his mouth, panting heavily like a cornered, desperate animal whose trap had just failed. "You cannot do this to me," Logan roared, spitting a thick glob of blood onto the pristine floor. "You think you can just walk in here and ruin my entire life? I am your legally wedded husband. I do not care what fake medical papers you try to show them. We are married. Whatever you make, whatever this technology company is worth, 50% of this entire asset is still legally mine, and I will take you to court to burn it all to the ground." Logan wiped the smear of dark blood from his busted lip, his chest heaving with desperate, ragged breaths. He looked around the shattered boardroom, realizing the rival executives were already edging toward the heavy oak doors, completely abandoning him and his toxic, fraudulent deal. But his greedy, calculating mind refused to accept absolute defeat. He planted his hands on his hips, his torn Armani suit hanging awkwardly off his frame, and let out a harsh, manic laugh. He turned his attention back to Camille, a vicious, triumphant gleam returning to his pale blue eyes. He was a master of legal extortion, and he knew exactly how to weaponize the family court system to bleed his victims dry. "You think tearing up a corporate contract changes the fundamental laws of this state?" Logan sneered, his voice dripping with condescending venom. "We are legally married, Camille. Every single algorithm you coded, every patent you registered, every dollar this company generated over the past 3 years happened during our marriage. Under the strict community property laws of this jurisdiction, I automatically own 50% of this entire empire. You cannot sell it, you cannot operate it, and you certainly cannot remove me from the executive board without my explicit legal consent." He began to pace confidently across the marble floor, the sharp click of his leather shoes cutting through the heavy silence. He felt completely invincible on this specific front. Exactly 12 months ago, while Camille was away on a business trip, Logan had hired an underground locksmith to crack the digital safe hidden in their master bedroom closet. He had found the original prenuptial agreement, the only legal barrier standing between him and her massive fortune. He had personally thrown that thick document into the stone fireplace and watched it burn to absolute ash. He smiled sadistically at her. "I will drag you through a brutal decade-long divorce. I will freeze every single corporate asset you possess. You will be completely bankrupt before the judge even hears our case." I stood perfectly still, watching him puff his chest out like a victorious conqueror clinging to the ghost of a burned piece of paper. I did not yell. I did not physically attack him. I simply let out a low, cold, humorless laugh that echoed sharply off the thick glass walls of the corporate boardroom. The sound sent a visible shiver down the spines of the remaining executives. I reached my calloused hand deep inside the inner pocket of my heavy canvas jacket. I pulled out a thick, pristine legal envelope. It was not a standard manila folder. It was secured tightly with a heavy, unbroken red wax seal, officially stamped with a distinct, undeniable federal insignia. I took 2 deliberate steps forward and tossed the heavy envelope directly onto the polished mahogany table. It landed with a loud, definitive smack right next to the shredded pieces of Logan's fraudulent acquisition contract. "You think I left the original binding prenuptial agreement sitting in a standard residential wall safe for a greedy, miserable little accountant to tear up?" I asked, my voice slicing through his arrogant delusion like a jagged combat knife. "You really are an absolute fool, Logan." Logan stopped pacing instantly. He stared at the dark red wax seal resting on the table, his confident smirk freezing into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. His eyes darted from the heavy envelope to my face, his brain scrambling to process the impossible reality sitting right in front of him. Camille took a step forward, her dark eyes piercing straight through his fragile, crumbling ego. "Did you honestly believe my father would let me marry a slick financial officer without establishing an impenetrable defensive perimeter?" Camille stated, her voice as cold and hard as a glacier. "I knew exactly what kind of ruthless predator you were the second you started asking questions about my stock options. We prepared for this exact moment years before you even bought a ring. I did not raise a naive, defenseless daughter. When Camille first launched her groundbreaking technology empire, I foresaw the exact kind of leeches and parasites her massive wealth would inevitably attract. We did not just hire a standard family lawyer to draft a simple prenup. We built an absolute financial fortress. We established a complex blind trust and an ironclad prenuptial agreement that explicitly and permanently severed any and all spousal rights to her intellectual property, her corporate holdings, and her future earnings. But I knew from my decades of military tactical experience that a vital piece of paper is only as secure as the physical vault it sits inside. Logan actually thought he was a criminal mastermind when he cracked that digital safe in their master bedroom a year ago. He thought he had successfully burned the only barrier standing between him and a $50 million payout. But he only burned a worthless dummy copy we specifically left there as bait to test his loyalty. He failed the test spectacularly. As a highly decorated combat veteran, I utilized my restricted high-level security clearance. I stored the original signed and heavily notarized prenuptial agreement inside a maximum security lockbox at the regional headquarters of the Department of Veterans Affairs. That specific vault is located inside a restricted federal facility constantly protected by armed government agents, retinal scanners, and strict federal immunity laws. A civilian financial officer like Logan could never even step foot on the same secure floor as that document, let alone breach the vault to destroy it. I pointed a thick finger at the red seal on the table. The terms inside that federal document are absolute, Logan. In the event of documented infidelity, physical abuse, or any attempt at medical manipulation, you instantly forfeit every single penny. You get no alimony, you get no corporate shares, you get no community property. You are legally entitled to absolutely nothing, 0%. You are walking out of this marriage with the exact same empty pockets you had when you walked in. The crushing, suffocating reality of his total and absolute defeat finally broke his mind. His grand, meticulously planned $50 million heist had evaporated completely, leaving him entirely destitute and legally exposed. He had lost the company. He had lost the massive payout. He had lost the legal battle before he could even file the paperwork. Logan roared like a severely wounded animal, a guttural, agonizing sound of pure, unhinged madness that tore through his throat. He grabbed a heavy, ergonomic leather chair and violently hurled it against the thick glass wall of the boardroom, shattering the outer pane into a spiderweb of jagged cracks. He swept his bleeding hands aggressively across the mahogany table, sending expensive crystal water glasses and silver pitchers smashing violently onto the hard marble floor. He was thrashing wildly around the pristine room, tearing at his own perfectly styled hair, completely consumed by the catastrophic, irreversible destruction of his entire life. While he screamed and violently destroyed the expensive corporate furniture, a new sharp sound pierced the high-altitude air. The deafening, unmistakable, and terrifying wail of dozens of police sirens erupted simultaneously from the busy downtown streets, converging directly below the towering corporate headquarters. The law had finally arrived. The wailing sirens grew deafening outside the towering glass walls of the corporate headquarters. The heavy frosted glass doors of the private executive elevator violently slid open. A swarm of heavily armed federal agents and local tactical police officers poured directly into the shattered boardroom, their heavy boots crunching loudly over the broken crystal and splintered wood. Logan, panting and bleeding, pointed a shaking finger directly at my chest. "Arrest him!" Logan screamed, his voice cracking with desperate, manic hope. "He is a violent fugitive. He broke into my house and assaulted me." The lead FBI agent, a tall, imposing man in a dark, tactical vest, did not even glance in my direction. He marched straight past me, moving with absolute, unyielding purpose. He stopped directly in front of Logan, blocking his path to the exit. Logan Vance, the agent, announced, his voice a booming, inescapable hammer of justice. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, massive international wire fraud, and severe elder and spousal abuse." Logan's mouth dropped open, his pale eyes darting frantically around the room as the officers moved in to surround him. On whose authority Logan demanded, trying to muster a final pathetic ounce of his shattered corporate arrogance. The crowd of armed federal agents parted slightly, and a woman stepped into the harsh morning light of the boardroom. It was Dr. Elena Rostova. She was no longer wearing her crisp, authoritative medical coat or her expensive designer heels. She looked completely broken, pale, and terrified, surrounded by two federal marshals. Logan stared at his secret mistress, absolute realization and profound betrayal washing over his bruised face. Elena did not look him in the eye. I had given her a strict, unforgiving ultimatum in that dark, underground casino parking lot, and her basic survival instinct had completely overridden her loyalty to a sinking ship. She had marched directly into the Federal Bureau of Investigation at dawn, signed a comprehensive immunity agreement, and handed over every single piece of damning evidence. She gave them the illegal black market pharmaceutical receipts, the detailed audio recordings of their murder plot, and the exact offshore routing numbers Logan had used to hide his stolen wealth. She told them everything, Logan. I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the silent room. Every single dosage, every single lie. The lead agent grabbed Logan's arms, twisting them forcefully behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking tightly around his wrists echoed like a final, absolute judgment. The cold steel bit into his skin, permanently chaining the arrogant financial officer to reality. As the agents yanked him forward, Logan's carefully constructed corporate facade entirely evaporated. The ruthless predator was instantly reduced to a pathetic, whimpering coward. He dropped heavily to his knees on the broken glass, sobbing uncontrollably. "Camille, please!" he wailed, tears and blood streaming down his face, completely abandoning his pride in front of the 20 elite industry executives who had just witnessed his total destruction. "I was desperate. I made a mistake. Do not let them take me. I am your husband." He was dragged aggressively across the polished marble floor, his expensive torn suit wiping up the spilled water and blood, screaming for mercy from the brilliant woman he had spent 4 months trying to execute. Camille stood perfectly still, her dark eyes entirely devoid of pity, watching the trash being physically removed from her pristine building. The heavy elevator doors slammed shut, cutting off Logan's pathetic screams. The heavy silence that followed was completely suffocating. Camille slowly turned her razor-sharp gaze toward the far end of the long mahogany table. Bradley Thompson and the 2 other corrupt board members who had actively conspired with Logan were sweating profusely, their faces entirely devoid of color. Camille leaned forward, planting her hands firmly on the table. "You greedy, miserable parasite sold me out for a golden parachute," she stated, her voice vibrating with lethal, unyielding authority. "You have exactly 30 seconds to grab your briefcases and clear out of my building before I instruct these remaining federal agents to arrest you for active complicity in corporate espionage. Your shares are permanently voided. You are finished." The 3 powerful men scrambled out of their ergonomic chairs like terrified rats fleeing a sinking ship, running frantically toward the emergency stairwell without saying a single word. 3 months later, the crushing wheels of the criminal justice system delivered the absolute final blow. The grand federal courtroom was packed to capacity with eager journalists, industry insiders, and horrified onlookers. I sat in the front row wearing a tailored charcoal suit, watching the absolute destruction of the monster who tried to break my family. The trial was incredibly brief. The federal prosecutors possessed an insurmountable mountain of evidence. They played the audio recordings of Logan coldly planning Camille's lethal injection. They displayed the fraudulent medical documents and the extensive offshore financial ledgers. Logan sat at the defense table, hollowed out and trembling, looking 20 years older than his actual age. The strict, unyielding federal judge did not show a single ounce of leniency. When the heavy wooden gavel slammed down, the sentence was absolute. Logan was officially convicted of attempted first-degree murder, massive corporate fraud, and unlawful medical imprisonment. He was sentenced to 20 agonizing years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, completely stripping away any possibility of early parole. The catastrophic fallout from his conviction violently ripped through the rest of his stolen empire. Because his initial criminal actions were strictly tied to massive financial fraud, the federal government immediately froze and seized all of his personal assets to pay massive restitution fines and legal penalties. The multi-million-dollar suburban mansion where he had locked my daughter away was aggressively foreclosed upon by the primary lending bank and sold at a public auction to cover his outstanding underground debts. He lost the luxury cars, the designer suits, and every single penny he had ever hidden. Dr. Elena Rostova did not escape the harsh consequences of her actions either. Although her strict immunity deal spared her from a lengthy prison sentence, the Federal Medical Board permanently and aggressively revoked her psychiatric license. She was legally barred from ever practicing medicine again. To satisfy the remaining terms of her strict plea agreement, she was sentenced to 2,000 hours of grueling, humiliating community service. The woman who once wore designer coats and stayed in luxury Bahamian resorts was now mandated to wear a bright orange reflective vest, picking up highway trash and scrubbing public city restrooms under the harsh, watchful eye of a strict probation officer. With the toxic parasites completely removed from our lives, the difficult but beautiful process of healing officially began. Camille refused to return to that cold, sterile mansion. Instead, she packed her belongings and moved directly into my modest, secure home. I cooked her warm, nourishing meals, ensured she attended her physical therapy sessions, and watched the vibrant, unstoppable spark of life completely return to her dark eyes. Once her physical strength was fully restored, she returned to her corporate headquarters with the absolute fury of a seasoned general. She completely restructured the entire executive board, promoting loyal, innovative engineers and permanently blacklisting anyone connected to Logan's toxic regime. The major financial markets responded incredibly well to her aggressive, transparent leadership. Within 6 months, the core diagnostic technology launched globally, and the overall valuation of her company skyrocketed, doubling to over $100 million. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, we were sitting together on my back porch, drinking dark roast coffee and enjoying the absolute peace we had fought so hard to secure. Camille pulled a thick official legal document from her leather portfolio and slid it across the small wooden table toward me. I looked down at the crisp paper. It was a finalized, legally binding transfer of corporate equity. She was officially signing over exactly 50% of her massive $100 million company directly into my name. "You saved my life, Dad," she said, her voice thick with profound, genuine emotion. "You protected the patent, you fought the entire legal system, and you never gave up on me. Half of this empire belongs to you." I looked at my brilliant, beautiful daughter, feeling a massive wave of overwhelming paternal pride wash over my chest. I reached into my heavy canvas jacket, pulled out my old leather wallet, and extracted a single crisp $1 bill. I placed the dollar gently on top of the multi-million-dollar contract and pushed it back across the table. "I am a retired military engineer, Camille," I stated, a warm, genuine smile breaking across my face. "I have my pension, my truck, and my daughter back. I do not need $50 million. I will take this $1 as a consulting fee, and you will keep building your empire." The bright morning sun filtered softly through the thick oak trees lining my quiet street, casting long, peaceful shadows across the wooden porch. I sat in my favorite worn armchair, the familiar weight of my old hunting rifle resting across my lap. The sharp metallic scent of gun oil mingled perfectly with the rich, bitter aroma of the black coffee steaming in my favorite ceramic mug. I methodically ran a clean cloth down the polished barrel of the rifle, my calloused hands moving with the slow, deliberate precision of a man who finally has absolutely nothing to rush for. The chaotic, deafening sirens, the blinding, sterile hospital lights, and the aggressive corporate battles felt like a distant, fading nightmare. The heavy iron door of a federal penitentiary had slammed permanently shut on the monster who tried to destroy us, bringing a profound, absolute silence back into my life. I looked up from my work, hearing the smooth purr of a high-performance engine starting up in the driveway. Camille stepped out of the front door looking absolutely radiant. She was wearing a sharp, tailored navy blue suit, her dark hair pulled back into a fierce, elegant style. The hollow, sickly pallor Logan had inflicted upon her was completely gone, replaced by the vibrant, unstoppable energy of a woman who had walked through literal hell and emerged forged in pure titanium. She flashed me a bright, genuine smile, her dark eyes sparkling with raw ambition as she tossed her expensive leather briefcase onto the passenger seat of her sleek new car. "Have a good day at the office, boss," I called out, my voice a warm, deep rumble. "Do not let those executives give you any trouble." She laughed, a rich, melodic sound that instantly healed the last remaining scars in my chest. "They would not dare, Dad," she replied, opening the driver's side door. "They know exactly who my security consultant is." I watched her sleek car glide smoothly down the street, blending into the morning commute to conquer the corporate world once again. I took a slow, deep sip of my black coffee, feeling a massive weight permanently lift from my aging shoulders. There is a dangerous common misconception in this modern, fast-paced world. People often look at an older, quiet man living a modest, retired life and automatically assume he is weak, oblivious, or entirely irrelevant. They see the gray hair, the slow, methodical steps, and the comfortable suburban routine, and they falsely believe the fire inside his belly has completely burned out. Logan made that exact fatal miscalculation. He looked at a 69-year-old black combat veteran and saw nothing but a naive stepping stone, a gullible old fool he could easily manipulate and discard. But he fundamentally misunderstood the absolute nature of a father's silence. My silence was never born of ignorance or submission. It was the calculated, disciplined observation of a soldier constantly scanning the perimeter for incoming threats. A father does not stop being a fierce protector just because his daughter grows up, becomes wealthy, and puts on a designer business suit. The primal instinct to shield your flesh and blood from vicious predators never retires. It simply waits patiently in the shadows, keeping the weapons clean and the mind razor sharp. True family is not merely defined by shared genetics or smiling faces in expensive holiday photographs. Anyone can stand next to you in the bright, warm sunlight and happily drink your expensive champagne when the money is flowing and the times are easy. But the absolute undeniable definition of a real family is found in the darkest, most terrifying trenches of life. True family are the people who will willingly kick down a heavily fortified door in the dead of night when you are entirely too weak to stand on your own 2 feet. They are the ones who will violently tear apart corrupt legal systems, bankrupt ruthless corporations, and stand firmly between you and the Grim Reaper without a single moment of hesitation. When Camille was completely stripped of her voice, her autonomy, and her massive fortune, I did not simply weep or offer empty thoughts and prayers. I went to war, because that is the sacred, unbreakable vow a parent makes the exact second they hold their child for the very first time. You protect them against all enemies, foreign and domestic, no matter the overwhelming odds or the personal cost. I placed my clean hunting rifle gently against the wooden railing and leaned back in my chair, letting the cool morning breeze wash over my face. The brutal journey we just survived taught me a profound, unyielding lesson about the strict boundaries of human compassion. Kindness is a beautiful virtue, but it is absolutely not a universal currency meant to be spent on just anyone. Kindness is a sacred gift that should never under any circumstances be extended to predators who actively mistake it for crippling weakness. Logan and his corrupt mistress looked at our family's unconditional love and saw only a highly profitable vulnerability to be aggressively exploited. They weaponized the sacred bonds of marriage and the inherent trust of family, transforming them into sharp, lethal weapons of profound betrayal. But the universe has an incredibly strict and unforgiving accounting system. Those who ruthlessly exploit family ties, who manipulate the vulnerable for greedy financial gain, will always eventually pay the highest, most devastating price imaginable. Logan wanted $50 million and a luxurious escape to the Swiss Alps. Instead, he earned himself a cramped concrete cell, a steel toilet, and 20 agonizing years of absolute isolated misery. His life is permanently over precisely because he mistook my quiet, respectful distance for absolute powerlessness. Do not ever allow toxic individuals to convince you that tolerating their psychological abuse is somehow your familial duty. If someone actively demands that you sacrifice your dignity, your safety, or your hard-earned peace of mind in the name of keeping the family together, they do not actually love you. They are simply using you. It takes immense courage to draw a hard, immovable line in the sand and firmly declare that your absolute loyalty belongs only to those who genuinely respect you. You have the absolute fundamental right to fiercely protect your territory, your assets, and the people you cherish. Never apologize for possessing the strength to destroy the monsters hiding inside your own house. We survived the absolute worst betrayal imaginable, and we emerged on the other side completely unbroken. The empire Camille built is stronger than ever, and the foundation of our family is completely bulletproof. My name is Gregory, and I am incredibly proud to say that I successfully protected my daughter when the entire world turned its back on her. I hope my story serves as a powerful reminder to always trust your gut instincts and to never let anyone manipulate or silence you, regardless of how much power or money they pretend to wield. Have you ever had to fiercely defend a loved one from a toxic, manipulative partner or a greedy family member? How did you find the strength to stand up and fight back when the odds were completely stacked against you? Please share your own survival stories and personal victories in the comments section below. I read every single one of your messages, and your incredible strength constantly inspires me. If you found value in my journey today, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another powerful life story. If you want to support my ability to keep sharing these vital lessons, you can send a super thanks using the button below the video. Your generous support means the absolute world to me and helps this community grow stronger every single day. Look right there on your screen to find 2 more incredible stories of resilience and justice that I highly recommend you watch next. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and always protect the people you love. Until next time.